I had just been handed a death sentence. Terminal heart failure. I could barely breathe. My vision was blurring and my chest felt like it was wrapped in heavy iron chains. When I walked into the living room and quietly asked for a glass of water and a moment to sit down, my daughter-in-law turned around, her face twisted in absolute disgust, and screamed, "Throw this sick old man out. That custom sofa cost $15,000. I stood there trembling from physical weakness and looked at my own son, the boy I raised, the boy I gave everything to. He just looked away and stared at the floor in silence. I did not yell. I did not cry. I swallowed the pain, forced a cold smile, stood up perfectly straight, and walked out of the house that my money bought without saying a single word. By the next morning, I made one phone call to my lawyer. By noon, their entire world was about to burn. My name is Victor Holloway. I am 72 years old. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my ungrateful son and his arrogant wife, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone that the hand that feeds them can also take the plate away. For 40 years, I built a massive commercial logistics and waste management empire from the ground up. I started with one rusty garbage truck in the worst neighborhoods of the city. I am a black man who spent decades waking up at 3 in the morning, smelling like diesel fuel and sweat, fighting tooth and nail for every single contract. I built generational wealth so my family would never have to struggle the way I did. My late wife Gloria and I raised our son Julian to have the best of everything: private schools, expensive tutors, and a guaranteed executive position at my company. But wealth is a dangerous thing when it is handed to someone who never had to bleed for it. Julian grew up soft, and when he married Vanessa, everything got worse. Vanessa is a white woman from a family that constantly pretends to have old money even though they are drowning in debt. From the very first day I met her, I could see the quiet, subtle racism in her eyes, the little microaggressions, the way she would wipe her hands after shaking mine, the way she constantly complained about the smell of my work boots, completely ignoring the fact that those boots paid for the diamond ring on her finger. I let Julian and Vanessa live in a massive 6-bedroom estate in a gated community. The house was entirely in my name, purchased through my corporate trust, but I allowed them to treat it as their own. I thought I was being a good father. I thought providing for them would eventually earn me their respect. I was completely wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the doctor handed me the medical envelope. He looked me in the eye with deep pity and told me my heart was failing rapidly. He said I was in the final stages of terminal heart failure and that I needed to get my affairs in order immediately. Walking out of that clinic, the world felt distant. The ground felt unsteady beneath my feet. A heavy, suffocating weight pressed down on my chest, making every breath a physical battle. I decided to stop by the estate. I just wanted to see my son. I wanted the comfort of my family. I parked my truck in the circular driveway. I unlocked the heavy oak front door and stepped into the grand foyer. The air conditioning was freezing cold and the house smelled of expensive lavender diffusers. I felt incredibly dizzy. A sharp pain shot through my left arm. I shuffled into the main living room, clutching the medical envelope in my shaking hand. Vanessa was standing by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, holding up expensive fabric swatches, complaining loudly to Julian about the interior decorator. Julian was sitting in a leather armchair, scrolling through his phone, sipping a glass of imported scotch. I leaned heavily against the archway. Julian the First whispered, my voice incredibly weak and raspy. "Son, please get me a glass of water. I need to sit down for a minute. My heart is not right today. I just got some very bad news from the clinic." Julian looked up from his phone. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of concern, but before he could even move a muscle, Vanessa spun around. She did not ask what the doctor said. She did not rush over to help me. She looked at my slightly dusty clothes, looked at the pristine white Italian leather sofa behind Julian, and her face contorted with pure venom. "Do not let him sit there!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing sharply through the large room. "Throw this sick old man out of here right now!" Julian, look at him. He is sweating and filthy. That sofa cost $15,000, and I am not having him ruin the fabric with whatever illness he dragged in from the street. The sheer cruelty of her words hit me harder than the medical diagnosis. She spoke to me as if I were a stray diseased animal that had wandered into a palace. I looked directly at Julian. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to defend his father. I waited for the boy I had sacrificed my entire youth for to finally act like a man. Julian slowly lowered his phone. He looked at his wife, who was glaring at him with absolute authority. Then my son looked at me. He shifted his weight in the chair, cleared his throat awkwardly, and looked down at the expensive hardwood floor. "Dad, maybe you should just go home and rest," Julian muttered, his voice quiet and cowardly. "Vanessa has a lot of guests coming over later for a charity planning committee. We really cannot deal with a medical emergency right now. It is just bad timing." The silence that followed was suffocating. The pain in my chest suddenly vanished completely, replaced by a freezing, absolute clarity. My son was dead. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a pathetic, spineless puppet who allowed a racist, materialistic woman to treat his own father like garbage. They saw me as nothing but a walking ATM, an old relic they had to tolerate just to keep their credit cards active. I did not scream. I did not curse at them. I did not remind them that the roof over their heads, the clothes on their backs, and the scotch in Julian glass were all paid for by the very sweat they found so offensive. Explaining loyalty to parasites is a waste of breath. I slowly lowered my shaking hand. I swallowed the heavy lump in my throat. I looked at Vanessa, taking in her arrogant, entitled posture. Then I looked at Julian, who still refused to make eye contact with me. A cold, hollow smile formed on my lips. "I am sorry to interrupt your afternoon," I said softly, my voice perfectly steady. "Enjoy your custom sofa." I straightened my spine. I pushed through the physical exhaustion, turned around, and walked back through the grand foyer. The heavy front door clicked shut behind me, sealing them inside their bubble of unearned luxury. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully established their dominance over the old, tired workhorse. They had no idea they had just signed their own financial and social death warrants. I drove my truck to a quiet parking lot overlooking the city skyline. I sat there as the sun went down, watching the lights of the commercial buildings I owned flicker on one by one. I did not shed a single tear. Tears are for people who feel helpless. I felt incredibly powerful. I stayed in the truck until the sun came up the next morning. At exactly 8 o'clock, I picked up my phone and dialed a private number. The man who answered the phone was Donovan. Donovan is my lead corporate attorney. He is a ruthless, calculated shark in a tailored suit who has spent 20 years legally destroying anyone who tried to cross my company. "Good morning," Victor Donovan answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and professional. "Donovan," I said, staring out at the city I helped build. "It is time. I want you to initiate the total asset freeze we discussed last year. Pull the corporate housing privileges. Lock down the business accounts. Activate the purge protocol immediately." There was a brief pause on the line. I could almost hear Donovan smiling through the phone. "Understood," Victor Donovan replied smoothly. "Are we proceeding with the aggressive timeline?" "Yes," I answered coldly, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "The rats have walked right into the trap. Do not leave them a single crumb." I hung up the phone. My heart might have been failing, but my mind had never been sharper. The countdown had officially begun. I sat in the cab of my truck as the morning sun began to rise over the city skyline. The leather seat was familiar and grounding. 40 years ago, I was sitting in a truck just like this one, but back then it was held together by rust and duct tape. I had hauled scrap metal, hauled construction waste, and navigated the most dangerous streets in this city. I fought for municipal contracts in rooms filled with men who did not want to look a black man in the eye, let alone hand him a bid sheet. I built Holloway Logistics drop by sweat-soaked drop. I created a fleet of 500 trucks. I built a massive corporate infrastructure so that my family would never have to know the smell of a landfill or the ache of a broken back. I made sure my son Julian never had to struggle. I gave him the world on a silver platter. And sitting in the quiet morning light, I finally understood that my generosity was my greatest mistake. I shielded him from the struggle, and in doing so I made him weak. I made him a coward who would stand by in silence while his entitled racist wife ordered his dying father to be thrown out into the street like a stray dog. My phone vibrated in the cup holder, pulling me out of my thoughts. I looked at the screen. It was a call from the cardiology clinic. I answered it, expecting to hear a nurse offering me palliative care options or a hospice referral. Instead, I heard the frantic, panicked voice of Dr. Aris, the head cardiologist. "Mr. Holloway," the doctor stammered, his voice trembling with an absolute, terrified desperation. "Please, you have to listen to me. There has been a catastrophic administrative error, a horrible mistake." I did not speak. I just listened to the man hyperventilate on the other end of the line. "The chart I handed you yesterday. The diagnosis of terminal heart failure. It does not belong to you. Dr. Aris confessed, sounding as if he were bracing for a multi-million-dollar medical malpractice lawsuit. We had another patient in the clinic yesterday afternoon, an elderly man with the exact same first and last name, just a different middle initial. The files were mixed up in the printing room. Mr. Holloway, your heart is perfectly fine. You are not dying. I sat there in absolute silence. I looked down at my hands resting on the steering wheel. The suffocating weight that had been pressing down on my chest since yesterday afternoon suddenly lifted. The shortness of breath, the dizziness, the crushing pain in my arm, it all made sense now. What about my symptoms? I asked, my voice cold and dangerously calm. If my heart is fine, why could I barely stand up in your waiting room? It is an allergic reaction, the doctor explained frantically. The new blood pressure medication I prescribed you last week has a rare severe side effect. It mimics the physical symptoms of cardiac distress. If you stop taking the pills immediately and drink plenty of water, the symptoms will completely vanish within 24 hours. I am so incredibly sorry, Mr. Holloway. We will do whatever it takes to make this right. Please do not sue the clinic. I took a slow, deep breath. The physical weakness was already starting to fade, replaced by a surge of pure, freezing adrenaline. I realized in that exact moment that this medical mix-up was not a tragedy. It was a massive divine gift. It was the ultimate Trojan horse. Dr. Aris, I said smoothly, completely burying my relief under a layer of calculated authority. I will not sue you. I will not report your clinic to the medical board. I will walk away and pretend this administrative disaster never happened on one very strict condition. You are to tell absolutely no one about this mistake. If anyone from my family calls your office inquiring about my health, you are bound by patient confidentiality to say nothing. As far as the world is concerned, I walked out of your clinic yesterday with a death sentence. Do you understand me? The doctor agreed, instantly sobbing his relief into the receiver. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. My family thought I had one foot in the grave. They thought the old workhorse was finally being put out to pasture, and the masks had completely slipped off their faces. Why on earth would I correct them? Their arrogance and their ignorance were giving me the exact leverage I needed to completely destroy them. I drove to a small, quiet diner on the edge of the industrial district. I sat in a back booth, ordered a bitter black coffee, and began to map out my strategy. I had just taken my first sip when my phone buzzed with a high-priority automated alert. I picked up the device. It was a direct security notification from the corporate banking division at my primary financial institution. The text message was a fraud alert for the company Platinum account. A charge had just been successfully processed for $50,000. I stared at the screen. The merchant was listed as an elite, ultra-exclusive contemporary art gallery located in the wealthiest shopping district of the city. $50,000. I was supposedly dying of terminal heart failure. I had been ruthlessly cast out of my own home less than 18 hours ago, left to wander the streets with a failing heart. And my daughter-in-law was not grieving. She was not making funeral arrangements. She was out spending my company money on modern art to decorate the living room she had just kicked me out of. The sheer staggering audacity of the transaction made me smile, a cold, humorless smile. They truly believed the clock was ticking down on my life, so they were accelerating their spending. They thought the vault was left wide open and the security guard was dead on the floor. I immediately dialed the private number of my lead corporate attorney, Donovan. Donovan is not a lawyer who handles speeding tickets or petty disputes. He is a predator in a custom-tailored suit, a man who thrives on corporate warfare and absolute financial destruction. Donovan said as soon as he answered the line, "Pull up the real-time ledgers for the corporate Platinum accounts. Tell me exactly what Julian is doing." I could hear the rapid clicking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. Victor, Donovan said, his voice sharp and analytical. Julian logged into the master corporate portal at 6 this morning. He bypassed the standard review process and authorized a massive limit increase on Vanessa auxiliary card. She just dropped 50 grand at a gallery, and she has another pending transaction for $20,000 at a luxury imported furniture boutique. I took another sip of my black coffee. "Let the transactions clear," I instructed. "Let her dig the hole as deep as she possibly can. But I want you to freeze the primary accounts by noon. There is something else you need to know." "Victor," Donovan interrupted, his tone shifting into something much darker. "I have been monitoring the estate security logs since you told me to initiate the purge protocol this morning. Vanessa is not just out shopping for expensive paintings. She has actively dispatched a premium residential security firm to the property. I narrowed my eyes. What are they doing? They are ripping out the main gate mechanisms, Donovan reported. She ordered a full system override. They are changing every single physical lock on the doors, resetting the alarm codes, and wiping your biometric access from the security panels. She is doing it right this very second. I sat back in the vinyl booth of the diner. The absolute ruthlessness of her actions hung heavily in the air. Vanessa was completely locking the sick, dying old man out of the 6-bedroom mansion that his own logistics company owned. She was ensuring that even if I tried to crawl back home to die in my own bed, I would be left out on the concrete driveway. She was utterly convinced that I would either drop dead on a park bench or be forced to check myself into a run-down state facility. She was securing the castle before my body was even cold. And Julian, the boy I had given the world to, was standing right beside her, handing her the keys. I did not feel a single ounce of sorrow. I did not feel betrayal. I felt absolute freezing focus. The time for playing the generous, forgiving father was officially over. Do not interfere with the security firm. I told Donovan, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Let her change the locks. Let her feel completely safe behind those gates. Let her feel like she has won the war. But at exactly 12 o'clock, I want you to freeze every single corporate account linked to Julian. Cut off his personal trust funds. Invalidate the company credit cards. And Donovan start drafting the commercial eviction papers for that estate. Understood, Victor Donovan replied smoothly. The trap is set. I hung up the phone and looked out the diner window at the city moving past me. They thought they had thrown a sick old man out into the cold. They had no idea they had just unleashed a monster who was going to take back every single thing he ever built. I checked into the penthouse suite of the Grand Monarch Hotel under a highly classified corporate alias. While my ungrateful son and his venomous wife were busy changing the locks on my estate, fully believing I was wandering the city streets waiting for my failing heart to finally stop beating, I was sitting on a velvet sofa overlooking the skyline I helped build. I was not dying. I was preparing to become the architect of their absolute destruction. At exactly 2 p.m, there was a sharp knock at my heavy wooden door. It was Donovan, my lead corporate attorney. He did not walk in with a single simple folder. He walked in carrying 2 heavy, reinforced steel briefcases. His face was carved out of stone. Donovan is a man who deals with corporate espionage and multi-million-dollar lawsuits every single day. But as he sat down across from me at the glass coffee table, I could see genuine disgust burning deep in his eyes. Victor Donovan said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave. We executed the deep dive audit on the master corporate ledgers just like you asked. What we found goes far beyond Vanessa buying expensive paintings or Julian using the company credit cards to fund his lavish lifestyle. This is not just family theft. This is a massive, highly orchestrated federal conspiracy. I set down my cup of coffee. I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees. I told him to walk me through it step by step. Donovan popped the latches on the first briefcase and began spreading thick stacks of government contracts across the table. For 40 years, I had built Holloway Logistics with my own bare hands. Because I am a black man who built a successful business from the ground up in a system designed to keep us down, my corporation held a very specific, highly coveted status. We were officially certified as a minority-owned business enterprise. That certification meant something profound to me. It meant we earned priority bidding on lucrative federal and state infrastructure projects. It was a system designed to level the playing field for minority communities. Julian knew the immense power of that certification. As the acting chief executive officer on paper, Julian used my name, my face, and my lifetime of hard work to aggressively bid on massive government logistics contracts over the past 2 years. And he won them. He secured over $40 million in federal transportation and waste management bids. But Donovan slid a second stack of papers in front of me. These were the internal payout ledgers. Julian did not use a single one of our 500 trucks to fulfill those contracts, Donovan explained, pointing to the highlighted red numbers on the pages. He did not use our dispatchers. He did not hire from our community. Holloway Logistics was doing absolutely zero physical work on these sites. Julian transformed your entire legacy into an illegal shell corporation. I stared at the numbers in disbelief. The federal money was hitting my company accounts and then instantly disappearing. Within 24 hours of receiving the government funds, Julian was wiring 95% of the total gross profit out of our treasury. He was subcontracting the entirety of the physical labor to a secondary external logistics firm. I looked up from the paperwork. I asked Donovan a very simple question. I asked him who owned the subcontractor that was swallowing all of my federal money. Donovan did not say a word at first. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a large, glossy photograph printed from a country club's social media page. He placed it right in the center of the table. It was a picture taken at an exclusive members-only golf resort. Julian was in the photograph, but he was not standing like a proud, powerful executive. He was standing slightly off to the side, wearing a forced, submissive smile, holding a tray of drinks like an obedient servant. Standing right in the center of the frame, wearing a bespoke suit, smoking an imported cigar, and smiling with the absolute arrogance of unearned privilege was a white man I recognized instantly. It was Wyatt, Vanessa's biological brother. My blood turned to pure freezing ice. The external company stealing all the federal funds was called Oak Ridge Solutions. It was a private logistics firm owned entirely by Wyatt and his elitist all-white family. The sheer sickening reality of the conspiracy hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Wyatt Company Oak Ridge Solutions was completely ineligible for those highly lucrative government contracts. They could never win those federal bids on their own, so they used my son. They used Julian as their ultimate disposable pawn. They needed a black face. They needed my minority certification to bypass the system. Julian handed over my hard-earned legacy to his wife's arrogant family so they could exploit federal diversity programs. He acted as the perfect obedient shield. He absorbed all the legal liability, signed all the federal paperwork under my company name, and then quietly funneled tens of millions of dollars directly into the pockets of a family that secretly despised him. I remembered the day Julian married Vanessa. I remembered Wyatt refusing to shake my hand at the reception, claiming he had just washed his hands and did not want to get them dirty. That was the man my son was committing federal treason to impress. Donovan watched my face as I processed the absolute magnitude of the betrayal. Victor Donovan said quietly, "Julian is not just a terrible son. He is committing massive fraud against the United States government. He is violating the False Claims Act. When the federal authorities find out that a white-owned company is using a minority front to steal diversity contracts, they do not just hand out simple fines. They hand out 20-year federal prison sentences." I looked down at the photograph of Julian smiling submissively next to Wyatt. The physical pain of my supposed heart failure was absolutely nothing compared to the disgust I felt in my soul right then. My son had not only betrayed me as a father, he had betrayed his own race. He had sold out his own bloodline for a pat on the head from a family of privileged vultures who only saw him as a useful, foolish monkey holding the door open to the vault. Julian wanted so desperately to be accepted by Vanessa high society world that he willingly became their financial slave. They did not respect him. They were using him to commit severe federal crimes, fully knowing that if the government ever caught on, Julian's name was the only one on the official dotted line. They were planning to take the millions and leave my son to rot in a federal penitentiary. I did not scream. I did not throw the coffee cup against the wall. I slowly gathered the contracts, the ledgers, and the photograph and placed them neatly back into the briefcase. "Donovan," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet penthouse suite with the cold mechanical precision of a loaded gun. "Do not shut down the accounts just yet." Donovan frowned in confusion. "Victor, if we leave the accounts open, they will keep funneling the money directly to Wyatt." I looked up at my lawyer, a predatory smile slowly forming on my face. "That is exactly what I want them to do," I replied. "Let them steal a few more million. Let the federal footprint become so massive, so undeniably huge that no expensive defense attorney in this country will ever be able to save them. We are not just going to fire Julian. We are going to hand the entire parasitic family over to the federal government on a silver platter." The trap was no longer just about taking back my house. It was about absolute total annihilation. The rats had eaten the poison, and now I was just waiting for the bleeding to start. Sitting in the dimly lit living room of my penthouse suite, I watched the glowing screen of my tablet in absolute disgust. My ungrateful son and his treacherous wife had just launched the next phase of their master plan, and they were executing it on the largest public stage possible. They had uploaded a video to every major social media platform. The video was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and public relations. Vanessa was sitting on the very same $15,000 sofa she had banished me from just 48 hours ago. She wore a simple, oversized sweater. Her hair was deliberately messy, and she wore absolutely no makeup to make herself look exhausted and heartbroken. Julian sat right beside her, holding her hand, his head bowed in a posture of overwhelming grief. Julian looked directly into the camera and squeezed out a single pathetic crocodile tear. He told the world that his beloved elderly father had wandered out of the house in a state of severe mental confusion. He claimed that I was suffering from aggressive late-stage dementia and terminal heart failure. He begged anyone watching to please contact the local authorities if they saw a confused, sick old black man wandering the streets. He said I did not know my own name and that I was in grave medical danger without my daily medication. Then Vanessa leaned her head on his shoulder and started to gently sob. She told the camera how much she loved her father-in-law, how she had dedicated her life to caring for me, and how the family was entirely shattered by my sudden disappearance. I scrolled through the thousands of comments flooding the video. People from all over the country were sending their prayers and well wishes. Complete strangers were praising Vanessa for being an absolute saint of a daughter-in-law. They were calling Julian a devoted, loving son carrying an unimaginable burden. The public bought the entire narrative hook, line, and sinker. They had perfectly weaponized my absence. By painting me as a lost senile invalid on the brink of death, they were establishing an undeniable public record of my mental incompetence. When the time came to officially seize my commercial real estate and hand my company over to Wyatt, nobody would question the legal takeover. They would just assume the poor sick old man was finally put into a home for his own safety. They thought they were controlling the narrative. They thought I was sitting on a park bench somewhere waiting for my heart to stop. But a man who builds a logistics empire knows that every massive structure has a weak point. I needed someone on the inside. I needed someone who could walk right through their front door without raising a single alarm. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of my grandniece, Keisha. Keisha is 25 years old and sharp as a razor blade. She is the daughter of my late sister, and she possesses the exact same relentless, calculating intelligence that runs in our bloodline. Keisha works as a senior forensic auditor for one of the top accounting firms in the city. She tracks down hidden assets and digital footprints for a living. More importantly, she has always seen right through Vanessa. Keisha never fell for the high society illusion. She recognized the quiet racism, the condescension, and the pure greed masking itself as polite manners. When Keisha answered the phone, I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told her exactly what was happening. I told her about the false medical diagnosis, the massive corporate fraud Julian was committing with Wyatt, and the fake crying video they had just posted online. Keisha did not panic. She did not gasp in shock. She simply asked me what I needed her to do. I told her I needed eyes and ears inside that house. I needed to know exactly what they were saying when the cameras stopped rolling. Less than an hour later, Keisha parked her car in the driveway of my estate. She played her part beautifully. She walked up to the front door with tears in her eyes, acting like the panicked, terrified niece who had just seen the viral video. Julian and Vanessa let her inside, completely lowering their guard. They thought Keisha was just another emotional relative they could easily manipulate. While Vanessa was busy in the living room answering fake sympathy calls from her wealthy friends, and Julian was pacing in the backyard nervously smoking a cigarette, Keisha asked to use the restroom near the kitchen. She did not go to the restroom. Keisha slipped quietly into the kitchen where Vanessa kept her personal tablet charging on the marble island. With the practiced speed of a digital auditor, Keisha bypassed the simple lock screen using the birthday of Vanessa dog, a pathetic security flaw Keisha had noticed years ago. She quickly synced the tablet to a hidden cloud server, giving her real-time access to Vanessa private family group chats, encrypted messages, and microphone permissions. Before anyone even noticed she was missing from the hallway, Keisha had successfully planted a digital wiretap in the very heart of their operation. She thanked them for their efforts, wiped a fake tear from her cheek, and drove away. I sat in my hotel penthouse as the sun went down, waiting patiently. I knew that the performance of the grieving family would eventually exhaust them. I knew that once the doors were locked and the curtains were drawn, the true monsters would come out to play. At exactly 11 o'clock at night, my phone chimed with a secure encrypted file transfer from Keisha. The message attached simply read, "You need to hear this right now." I opened the audio file. The recording was crystal clear. It captured the ambient noise of my own kitchen. I heard the sharp clinking of a wine bottle hitting a granite countertop and the sound of liquid pouring into a glass. Then I heard Julian's voice. He was pacing back and forth, his shoes scuffing against the tile. Julian sounded incredibly nervous. He was breathing heavily, terrified of the massive lie they had just told the world. What if the police actually find him? Julian stammered, his voice cracking with cowardice. What if someone brings him to a hospital and they run tests? They will see his heart is fine. They will know we made the whole thing up. Wyatt is pressing me for the next transfer from the government contract, and if my dad talks to the authorities, we are all going to federal prison. We went too far with that video. Then Vanessa spoke. Her voice was not the soft, weeping tone she had used on the internet just a few hours prior. Her voice was completely devoid of emotion. It was cold, flat, and dripping with absolute murderous intent. She took a slow sip of her wine before answering her panicking husband. "Stop whining like a pathetic child," Vanessa snapped sharply. "Everything is perfectly under control. Nobody is going to believe a single word he says. He is an old, confused man wandering the streets in the freezing night. Just let the old man wander a few more days and freeze to death. It solves all of our problems permanently. Do not worry about the body. I have already bought off a private doctor from the country club who is ready to sign the official death certificate stating he died of natural cardiac failure. No autopsy, no questions asked." The audio recording ended with the soft clink of her wine glass being placed back onto the marble counter. I sat perfectly still in the quiet hotel room. The air in my lungs felt like ice. This was no longer just a case of financial fraud or corporate theft. They were not just waiting for me to die. They were actively counting on the elements to kill me, and they had already bribed a medical professional to cover up the evidence of their neglect. My own son stood in that kitchen and listened to his wife casually plan the concealment of my death, and he did not say a single word to stop her. I slowly deleted the social media application from my tablet. I did not need to see any more of their fake tears or their public lies. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Donovan. The gloves were completely off. They wanted to plan a funeral. I was going to make sure they got one, but it would be the absolute burial of their entire lives. I spent 40 years giving my son everything, but the most precious things in my home were not bought with corporate profits. They were the physical memories of my late wife, Gloria. Gloria was a queen. She stood by me when I had nothing but calloused hands, a rusted truck, and a dream. Over the decades, as the company grew into an empire, I bought her pieces of antique jewelry to celebrate our milestones. A diamond brooch for our 10th anniversary, a pair of emerald earrings when we secured our first federal contract, and her absolute favorite, a breathtaking vintage ruby necklace that I placed around her neck on her 50th birthday. I kept that collection locked in a heavy biometric safe in the master bedroom. It was not meant to be sold. It was meant to be passed down to my future granddaughters. But parasites do not care about family legacy. They only care about cash. The digital wiretap my grandniece Keisha planted on Vanessa's tablet was paying dividends by the hour. On Thursday morning, Keisha forwarded me a series of encrypted text messages between Vanessa and the manager of an underground invite-only auction house located in the wealthiest district of the city. Vanessa had somehow bypassed the biometric lock on my safe. She had likely hired a corrupt private locksmith while her security firm was busy changing the front gates of the estate. The text messages were a negotiation. Vanessa was secretly liquidating Gloria's entire antique jewelry collection. She was bragging to the auctioneer about the purity of the stones and demanding a quiet, discreet cash transaction. She wanted to sell my dead wife memories to fund her fake aristocratic lifestyle, completely certain that I would freeze to death on the streets before anyone noticed the safe was empty. A lesser man would have called the police immediately. A lesser man would have reported the theft and sent uniformed officers to the auction house to seize the stolen property and arrest her. But I did not want to stop the sale. I wanted to elevate the psychological warfare to a level Vanessa could not possibly comprehend. I picked up my phone and called Donovan. I told him to authorize a massive withdrawal from one of my completely hidden offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. We created a temporary shell company on the spot. Donovan hired a private high-end asset acquisition proxy. He was an elegant, distinguished-looking European gentleman who specialized in moving anonymous wealth for elite clients. I gave him one simple instruction. Go to that private club, bid on every single piece of Gloria jewelry, and completely blow every other buyer out of the water. Do not let a single diamond leave that room in the hands of a stranger. Later that evening, I sat in my hotel penthouse and listened to the live audio feed provided by my proxy. The auction was held in a velvet-lined back room of a private country club. Vanessa was there sipping expensive champagne, playing the part of the grieving daughter-in-law who was simply liquidating estate assets to pay for her poor, sick father-in-law medical care. When the auctioneer presented Gloria Ruby necklace, the bidding started at $50,000. The wealthy patrons in the room began to raise their paddles, but my proxy did not play their game. He immediately raised his paddle and offered $150,000, 3 times the actual market value of the piece. The room went dead silent. Nobody dared to counter the bid. Over the next hour, my proxy did the exact same thing for every single piece of Gloria jewelry. He bought the emerald earrings, the diamond brooch, and the gold bracelets, paying triple the price for all of them. Through the audio feed, I could hear Vanessa practically hyperventilating with joy. She was quietly squealing to her friends, absolutely intoxicated by the sheer amount of money she was making. She thought she was a financial genius. She thought she had just pulled off the heist of the century. She gladly accepted the finalized transfer of funds to her private offshore account, completely unaware that she was just paid with the very same money she thought she had successfully locked me out of. Once the auction concluded and the proxy secured the velvet boxes containing my wife's jewelry, he followed my second set of strict instructions. He did not leave the club immediately. He mingled in the crowded coat check area, brushing past Vanessa as she was busy bragging on the phone to her brother Wyatt. With the practiced hands of a professional operative, he slipped a very specific item directly into her open designer handbag, completely unnoticed in the crowded room. I waited until 9 o'clock that night. I knew Vanessa and Julian would be back at the estate, probably celebrating their massive stolen payday. Keisha had tapped into the internal security cameras of the house, allowing me to watch the living room feed directly from my tablet. I watched Vanessa walk into the grand foyer. She was glowing with arrogant pride. She tossed her keys onto the marble console and walked over to the $15,000 white leather sofa, the exact same sofa she had banished me from just days ago. Julian was sitting nearby, pouring himself another glass of imported scotch, looking perfectly content with the fact that his wife had just sold his own mother heirlooms to strangers. Vanessa sat down and pulled her designer handbag onto her lap. She unzipped the main compartment, reaching inside to grab her phone. Suddenly, her hand froze. Her arrogant smile instantly vanished. She looked down into the depths of her expensive bag, her eyes widening in absolute paralyzing horror. She slowly pulled her hand back out. Dangling from her trembling fingers was the heavy, breathtaking vintage ruby necklace. The exact same necklace she had just sold to an anonymous European billionaire 2 hours ago for $150,000. It was physically impossible for that necklace to be inside her bag. Unless the buyer was not a stranger at all. Unless the buyer was a ghost who could walk right past her and slip it into her purse without making a single sound. Vanessa's chest began to heave. She was hyperventilating, staring at the sparkling rubies as if they were covered in venom. Then she noticed a small, thick piece of black cardstock tied to the golden clasp of the necklace. Her shaking fingers fumbled to turn the card over. I had instructed the proxy to write a very specific, undeniable message on that card in elegant silver ink. I knew exactly what it said. The note read, "The stench of poverty still clings to your things." Vanessa dropped the ruby necklace onto the pristine white leather sofa as if it were burning her skin. She let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream of pure terror that echoed through the massive, empty house. Julian jumped out of his chair, spilling his expensive scotch all over the expensive rug, frantically asking her what was wrong. But Vanessa could not speak. She just backed away from the necklace, pointing at it with a shaking finger, her entire false reality collapsing around her. She finally realized that I was not wandering the streets waiting to die. I was everywhere. I was watching her. And the psychological torture had only just begun. The psychological terror of the ruby necklace had completely shattered Vanessa's false sense of security. But parasites do not stop feeding just because they are scared. They simply become more desperate. The realization that I was not a confused old man wandering the streets to die had pushed her back against a wall. She knew that her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The locks on my estate had been changed, but without a legal document transferring my financial power of attorney to Julian, they could not actually sell the house or liquidate the massive company assets they were so eager to steal. They needed a judge to declare me legally incompetent. And to do that, they needed a doctor willing to sell his soul. Thanks to the digital wiretap Keisha had planted on Vanessa's tablet, I was always 10 steps ahead of their desperation. On Friday morning, Keisha called me with a critical update. She had intercepted a series of highly encrypted messages between Vanessa and a man named Dr. Leonard Kendrick. Dr. Kendrick operated a very exclusive, very expensive boutique medical practice in the wealthiest suburb of the city. He catered strictly to the elite, but his real business was much darker. He was known in certain circles as the man you go to when you need a medical problem to disappear, or, in my case, when you need a fake medical problem to suddenly appear. He specialized in writing fraudulent psychiatric evaluations for greedy families looking to seize control of elderly relatives' estates. Vanessa had arranged a secret meeting with him for 2:00 that afternoon at a quiet, secluded coffee shop on the edge of the financial district. She was bringing the cash and he was bringing the official documents that would declare Victor Holloway a victim of advanced aggressive Alzheimer's disease. They thought they were conducting a brilliant covert operation. They had no idea they were walking directly onto a stage that I had built. Long before Vanessa even pulled her luxury SUV into the coffee shop parking lot, my grandniece Keisha was already sitting at a small corner table inside. Keisha wore a heavy, oversized, hooded sweatshirt, a pair of thick, dark sunglasses, and a generic medical face mask blending in perfectly with the paranoid post-pandemic crowd. She was nursing a cup of green tea, casually reading a paperback novel, but her smartphone was propped up perfectly against her coffee mug. The camera lens was pointed directly at the empty table right behind her, and it was actively streaming a crystal-clear, high-definition, live video feed straight to the tablet in my hotel penthouse. I sat in my leather chair alongside my lawyer Donovan, watching the screen as the trap was finally set into motion. At exactly 2:00, Vanessa walked into the cafe. She looked exhausted. Her usual high society arrogance was completely overshadowed by her frantic, darting eyes. She kept looking over her shoulder, terrified that a ghost might be following her. She chose the table directly behind Keisha, completely oblivious to the camera recording her every move. A few minutes later, Dr. Kendrick arrived. He was a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver hair and a tailored suit projecting the absolute illusion of medical authority. He sat down across from Vanessa, completely unaware that he was about to lose his medical license and his freedom. Through the live audio feed, I listened to them speak in hushed, hurried tones. Vanessa did not waste any time. She reached into her oversized designer handbag and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. She slid it across the small wooden table. I watched on the screen as Dr. Kendrick discreetly opened the flap and thumbed through the stacks of crisp, unsequential $100 bills. $20,000 in cold, hard cash. The exact price of a man's integrity. Dr. Kendrick smiled a greasy, satisfied smile. He slipped the envelope of cash into his leather briefcase. In return, he pulled out a crisp white medical folder sealed with the official stamp of his private practice. He slid it across the table to Vanessa. "The evaluation is fully complete and legally notarized," Dr. Kendrick whispered, his voice captured perfectly by Keisha's hidden microphone. "The documents state that Victor Holloway suffers from severe, irreversible cognitive decline and represents an immediate danger to his own financial and physical well-being. With these papers, any judge in this state will grant your husband full and immediate medical and financial conservatorship. The old man will not be able to sign a check or make a single legal decision for the rest of his life." Vanessa snatched the folder from the table like a starving animal. I watched a sickening smile of pure relief spread across her face. She truly believed she had just bought the keys to my entire kingdom. She thought she finally had the ultimate weapon to destroy me and take everything I had built over 40 long years. She thanked. The corrupt doctor stood up quickly and practically ran out of the coffee shop, eager to show Julian their supposed victory. Dr. Kendrick stayed behind for a few moments, finishing his expensive espresso, thoroughly enjoying the feeling of being $20,000 richer. He had absolutely no idea that his entire life was about to be violently derailed. He casually walked out of the coffee shop, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He strolled across the sunlit parking lot toward his luxury imported sedan. He reached into his pocket for his car keys, already planning how he was going to spend my stolen money. But before he could even touch the handle of his car door, a dark, unmarked utility van suddenly blocked his path. The side doors of the van slid open with a heavy metallic crash. Two large men wearing plain clothes stepped out. They moved with a swift, terrifying, and absolute authority that made the corrupt doctor freeze dead in his tracks. They did not look like local police officers. They did not read him his rights right away. One of the men reached into his jacket pocket and flashed a heavy gold badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Dr. Kendrick dropped his briefcase. It hit the asphalt with a loud thud, the color completely drained from his distinguished face. He stammered, demanding to know what was going on, trying to project the fake authority of a respected medical professional. The lead federal agent stepped forward, completely unfazed by the doctor's suit or his status. Dr. Leonard Kendrick, the agent, said, his voice cold and devoid of any mercy. "You are currently in possession of $20,000 in illicit cash accepted as a direct bribe to falsify federal medical records in an attempt to defraud a minority-certified business owner. We have the entire transaction recorded on high-definition video and audio." My lawyer Donovan had not been sitting idly by. The moment Keisha had intercepted the text messages about the meeting, Donovan had made a very specific, very high-level phone call. Bribing a doctor to steal a house is a state crime, but bribing a doctor to seize control of a company that holds $40 million in active federal government contracts is a massive federal felony. Donovan had handed the FBI an absolute slam-dunk case of corporate racketeering and wire fraud on a silver platter. The federal agent leaned in close to the trembling doctor. "You have exactly two choices right now, doctor," the agent whispered, but the words echoed clearly through the surveillance feed we had tapped into. "Choice number one, we put you in handcuffs right here in this parking lot. We raid your clinic, we seize your assets, we permanently strip your medical license, and you spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States government." Dr. Kendrick began to shake violently. He looked like a man who had just looked over the edge of a bottomless cliff. "What is choice number two?" he gasped, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Choice number two," the agent replied smoothly, "is that you get back into your car, you drive back to your clinic, and you wait for a phone call from a man named Victor Holloway. When he calls, you answer. And from this second forward, you do exactly what he tells you to do. You belong to him now." Dr. Kendrick did not even hesitate. The arrogant, greedy physician who had casually signed away my human rights for a stack of cash completely broke under the weight of federal prison. He nodded frantically, promising to cooperate, swearing he would do whatever I demanded. The agent stepped back, got into their unmarked van, and drove away, leaving the corrupt doctor standing alone in the parking lot, completely owned and operated by the very man he had just tried to destroy. I sat back in my hotel penthouse and smiled. Vanessa thought she had purchased a weapon to end my life. She had no idea she had just bought the very nail that would seal her own coffin. The doctor was mine now, and the trap was ready to snap shut. I sat in the absolute darkness of my hotel penthouse. The only light in the room came from the glowing screen of my secure laptop. I was wearing a headset, listening intently to a live audio feed my private investigator had established. While I was meticulously plotting the absolute destruction of my enemies, my ungrateful son was busy celebrating his own treason. Wyatt, the arrogant biological brother of Vanessa, was hosting a massive, lavish invite-only dinner at the Oak Ridge Golf Club. It is the most exclusive, old-money establishment in the entire state. It is a place where generational wealth is protected, and people who look like me are usually only permitted inside if we are carrying a tray or cleaning the floors. But tonight they were celebrating a brand new $10 million government infrastructure contract. Wyatt did not earn that contract. He stole it. He used my company, Holloway Logistics. He used my minority-owned business enterprise certification, the very certification I bled and fought for over 40 long years to completely bypass the federal bidding process. And Julian, the boy I raised to be a king, was sitting at Wyatt's table acting like a grateful peasant just happy to be invited into the castle. Through the earpiece, I could hear the clinking of heavy crystal glasses and the obnoxious, booming laughter of men who had never worked a hard day in their lives. Wyatt was holding court. He was bragging to his wealthy circle of friends about his brilliant new business strategy. He did not even try to hide his absolute disdain for my son or for my legacy. I listened as Wyatt called for a toast. He tapped his silver spoon against his glass, demanding silence from his elite guests. He raised his drink and told the table to raise their glasses to Julian. He called my son the ultimate golden goose. He said, "You did a fantastic job, Julian. Thanks to your father and his colored minority label, we completely bypassed the federal red tape and scored the biggest payday of the decade. You just keep signing the government papers and be a good boy, and we will make sure you get enough scraps to keep my sister Vanessa happy." The men at the table erupted into a chorus of patronizing laughter. They were openly mocking him. They were explicitly stating that they only used his skin color and my lifetime of struggle to line their own pockets. They viewed my entire logistics empire as nothing more than a convenient loophole to exploit. I sat in the dark room and waited for the sound of a glass shattering. I waited for Julian to stand up, flip the heavy dining table, and defend his pride. I waited for my son to defend his race, his father, and his own manhood against these arrogant parasites. But the audio feed only delivered a pathetic, submissive chuckle. Julian actually laughed along with them. He swallowed the racial insult. He swallowed the absolute degradation of my life work. He raised his own glass and thanked Wyatt for the opportunity to sit at the big table. My son had completely sold his soul and his heritage just to be accepted by a room full of arrogant vultures who viewed him as nothing more than a useful disposable tool holding the door open to the federal vault. Hearing that pathetic laugh was the final nail in the coffin. I felt no more hesitation. I felt no more fatherly instinct or mercy. Julian was no longer my son. He was a willing accomplice to a racist, parasitic family that was actively defrauding the federal government using my name. He had chosen his side. It was time to send them a very clear message. It was time to let them know that the sick, dying old man they thought they had discarded was actually the predator watching them from the shadows. I had instructed my private investigator, who had smoothly infiltrated the country club catering staff for the evening, to prepare a very specific delivery for Wyatt Table. Wyatt is a man who loves to show off his wealth. He had pre-ordered a $5,000 bottle of vintage wine to cap off his celebration. He wanted to impress his friends with his refined taste and unlimited budget. But my operative intercepted the bottle in the kitchen. He made a small, highly significant modification to the presentation before bringing it out to the dining room. The audio feed captured the moment perfectly. I heard the investigator playing the role of the obedient waiter approach the loud, obnoxious table. He announced the arrival of the vintage wine. Wyatt clapped his hands together, demanding the waiter open it immediately and pour the first glass. But the waiter stopped. He spoke in a clear, professional tone. He informed Wyatt that the bottle came with a special complimentary message from an anonymous benefactor who wished to personally congratulate them on their massive government contract. I could hear the rustle of heavy paper as Wyatt tore the envelope open. I had instructed the investigator to attach a pristine laminated copy of the terminal heart failure diagnosis I had received on Tuesday. It was the exact same piece of paper that had caused Vanessa to order my immediate expulsion from the estate. It was the exact same diagnosis they were currently using to manipulate the public and build their fake conservatorship case against me. But I had added a very personal touch. At the very bottom of the medical document, written in my own thick, undeniable handwriting with a heavy black marker, were 4 simple words. Simple. Let the games begin. The arrogant laughter at the table died instantly. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the private dining room. Wyatt stopped talking mid-sentence. Julian's voice completely vanished. Through the audio feed, I heard Wyatt stammer. He asked the waiter who had sent the bottle. The waiter simply replied that the gentleman was an older black man who said his heart was feeling much better today. Then the waiter walked away, his footsteps fading into the background, leaving them to drown in their own sudden, paralyzing panic. Julian began to hyperventilate. I could hear his chair scrape violently against the hardwood floor as he stood up in a blind panic. He asked Wyatt what the paper said. When Wyatt read my handwritten note out loud, the absolute terror in Julian's voice was unmistakable. He realized instantly that I was not lost. I was not wandering the freezing streets waiting to die. I was not suffering from dementia. I knew exactly where they were. I knew exactly what they were celebrating, and I was completely in control of the board. What does this mean? Wyatt hissed, his fake aristocratic confidence completely shattering. How does he know about this dinner? He knows everything. Julian gasped, his breathing becoming ragged and shallow. We have to go. We have to leave right now. He is coming for us. I sat back in my hotel chair and took a slow sip of my water. They had spent the entire week thinking they were the brilliant hunters. They thought they had successfully trapped a weak, sick animal and stolen his kingdom without firing a single shot. But staring at that $5,000 bottle of wine and my handwritten promise of absolute war, they finally understood the brutal reality of their situation. They were not the hunters. They were the prey. and the hunt had officially started. The message I sent to the country club had the exact effect I intended. Panic is a highly predictable emotion. When a parasite realizes the host is not dead, their first instinct is not to fight. Their first instinct is to grab as much blood as they can and run. My private investigator tracked Julian leaving the golf club in a complete frenzy. He did not go home to confront Vanessa. He did not go to a lawyer. He went straight to his car and sped toward the financial district. I knew exactly what he was planning. He wanted to raid the corporate emergency reserve fund before I could officially lock him out. He was trying to authorize an immediate wire transfer of $5 million to an offshore account so he and Vanessa could flee the incoming federal storm. But a man who builds an empire never leaves the vault unguarded. Julian thought he still held the executive power to move those funds. He thought he could just walk into the central branch of the First National Corporate Bank, flash his title, and walk out a millionaire. He severely underestimated how deep my roots went in this city. I decided to meet my son at the bank. But I did not walk in wearing my custom-tailored suits. I did not arrive in my armored town car. I needed Julian to hang himself in front of the perfect audience. I needed him to commit a crime so visible and so morally repulsive that no judge in the country would ever grant him a shred of mercy. I put on the exact same wrinkled shirt and dusty trousers I had worn on the day Vanessa kicked me out of my own home. I scuffed my shoes. I messed up my hair. I practiced a slow, trembling shuffle. When I walked through the heavy, revolving glass doors of the bank lobby, I did not look like the founder of Holloway Logistics. I looked like a lost, broken, completely senile old man who had been wandering the streets for days. The bank lobby was a cavernous room made of pristine white marble and polished brass. Wealthy clients and sharp-suited executives moved quietly through the space. Right in the center of the VIP service area stood Julian. He was sweating profusely. His expensive suit looked rumpled. He was tapping his foot aggressively against the marble floor, waving a stack of withdrawal authorization forms at a terrified bank teller. He was demanding to see the branch manager immediately. He was shouting that time was of the essence and that the $5 million corporate transfer had to be cleared right this second. I shuffled slowly across the lobby floor. People stepped out of my way, looking at me with a mixture of pity and discomfort. I kept my head bowed and my shoulders slumped. I walked directly up behind my son. I reached out with a violently shaking hand and gently tugged on the sleeve of his expensive jacket. "Julian," I whispered. I made my voice sound incredibly frail, cracking with fake fear and confusion. "Julian, my boy, I am so cold. I forgot how to get back to our house. Please take me home." Julian spun around as if he had been struck by lightning. The color completely drained from his face. He stared at me in absolute paralyzing horror. He expected me to march in with a team of lawyers and federal agents. He did not expect to see a pathetic, sick old man begging for his help in the middle of a high-end financial institution. At that exact moment, the heavy glass door of the executive office swung open. The senior branch manager walked out holding a tablet, stepping into the VIP area to see what the commotion was about. The manager was a tall, distinguished black man named David. He wore an impeccable tailored suit and carried an air of absolute authority. Julian saw David approaching. Julian looked at the manager, then looked down at me. The panic in my son's eyes instantly morphed into toxic, arrogant rage. He was terrified that my presence would ruin his massive withdrawal. He was terrified that associating with a dirty, confused old man would destroy his sophisticated image in front of the senior banker. Instead of helping his father, instead of showing a single ounce of human compassion, Julian chose to protect his own fabricated pride. He slapped my trembling hand away from his jacket. He stepped back, wiping his sleeve as if my very touch had infected him with a disease. "Security!" Julian shouted at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing violently off the high marble ceilings. "Get this crazy old man away from me right now!" The entire bank lobby fell dead silent. Dozens of clients stopped what they were doing to stare at the scene. I looked up at Julian, keeping my eyes wide and perfectly innocent. "Julian, please," I whimpered, playing my role to absolute perfection. "I just need a glass of water. I am your father." "He is not my father," Julian screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "He is a senile, delirious old fool who wandered in from the street. He has no mind left. He has absolutely no rights here. Throw him out on the pavement where he belongs." And then Julian committed the ultimate, unforgivable mistake. He reached out with both hands, placed them flat against my chest, and shoved me backward with all his strength. I did not try to catch my balance. I allowed myself to fall hard onto the polished marble floor. I let out a sharp cry of pain as my shoulder hit the ground. I lay there clutching my chest, looking exactly like a frail, abused senior citizen who had just been violently attacked by a ruthless corporate executive. Julian did not even look down at me. He immediately turned his back on my body and faced the branch manager. "I apologize for that disturbance," David Julian said quickly, trying to smooth his tie and force a professional smile. "The old man has completely lost his mind. He is a danger to himself. Now, about that $5 million wire transfer. I need those funds moved to my offshore accounts immediately to secure a vital logistics contract." Julian stood there completely confident that his brutal display of dominance had secured his position. He thought he had just eliminated the final obstacle standing between him and absolute wealth. He made a catastrophic miscalculation. Julian did not know the history of the men who actually built this city. He did not know that David, the senior branch manager standing in front of him, was not just some random corporate banker. David and I served in the exact same infantry division in Vietnam 50 years ago. We bled in the mud together. We watched each other backs when the world wanted us dead. We had been best friends for 5 decades, and I had personally trusted David to manage the Holloway Logistics Reserve Funds since the day I deposited my very first million. David looked down at me lying on the floor. He did not rush over to help me up because David knew exactly what I was doing. We had spoken on the phone just 30 minutes prior. He knew the trap was set. David slowly lifted his gaze and looked at Julian. The expression on the banker face was so cold and filled with such pure, unadulterated hatred that Julian's forced smile instantly vanished. David did not look at the withdrawal forms in Julian's hand. He looked up at the high-definition security dome camera mounted directly above the VIP velvet ropes, the camera that had just captured every single second of the unprovoked physical assault in glorious 4K resolution. David looked back down at the pathetic boy I had raised. "Your wire transfer request is permanently denied," David said, his voice dropping to a freezing, terrifying whisper that carried across the silent lobby. Julian's mouth dropped open. "What are you talking about?" Julian stammered, panic flooding back into his eyes. "I am the acting chief executive officer. You have to process my signature. I demand those funds right now." "You are demanding nothing," David replied smoothly, stepping forward and taking the stack of withdrawal forms right out of Julian's hand. "5 minutes ago, I received a certified legal injunction from the true owner of those accounts, completely revoking your financial access and freezing every single dollar in the Holloway Reserve. You do not have a penny in this bank." Julian stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck. He looked wildly around the room, realizing that the exits were slowly being blocked by the bank-armed security guards. And furthermore, David continued pointing a long, steady finger directly at Julian's chest. "I just watched you violently assault a sick elderly man in my lobby. That is a severe felony in this state. The doors are locked and the police are already on their way to arrest you for elder abuse." Julian's legs gave out. The reality of his absolute destruction crashed down on him all at once. He was not walking out of this bank a millionaire. He was walking out in handcuffs. I slowly sat up on the marble floor, brushing the dust off my sleeves. I looked at the son who had just sold his soul for a pile of cash he would never get to spend. I did not smile. I did not say a word. I just watched him drown in the shallow puddle of his own profound stupidity. After the humiliating disaster at the bank, my old friend David showed just enough mercy to let Julian walk out the front doors without handcuffs. David knew that letting my son return to the world completely empty-handed was a punishment far worse than a night in a holding cell. Julian had failed miserably. He dragged himself back to the massive 6-bedroom estate with absolutely nothing to show for his arrogant demands. He had no $5 million to secure his escape and no offshore safety net to protect his wife. He was just a terrified boy hiding in a mansion he did not even own. But the wolves do not care if you are scared. They only care if you have meat to feed them. Wyatt was waiting for that money. The white-owned subcontractors Wyatt had hired to do the actual physical labor on the stolen government infrastructure project were aggressively demanding their payments. They needed cash for heavy machinery materials and daily payroll. When Julian called Wyatt to confess that the corporate reserve accounts were completely frozen, the polite high society mask Wyatt always wore instantly melted away. Through the digital wiretap Keisha planted, I listened to Wyatt rip into my son. Wyatt did not speak to Julian like a respected business partner or a brother-in-law. He spoke to him like a disobedient piece of farm equipment. Wyatt demanded that Julian take out a massive emergency commercial mortgage on the estate. He ordered Julian to leverage the property to get the cash by the end of the week, or he would personally throw Julian to the angry contractors. Julian was hyperventilating, practically crying through the phone, promising he would get the mortgage paperwork started immediately. My foolish son still truly believed the house was legally his to leverage. While Julian was frantically tearing through his home office looking for property deeds that had my name on them, I was sitting in the quiet luxury of my hotel penthouse. I was looking out the window at the city I helped build when Donovan walked in. My ruthless corporate attorney was carrying a single thick manila folder. It was much thinner than the briefcases from the previous day, but it was infinitely more destructive. This was the final kill shot. Donovan sat down across from me and placed the folder on the glass coffee table. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "The package is fully assembled, Victor." I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute weight of what we were about to do. I told him to pull the trigger. Donovan did not just file a local police report. He officially submitted a comprehensive whistleblower dossier directly to the highest authorities in the federal government. He filed the fraud complaint with the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, and the Federal Oversight Committee for Minority-Owned Business Enterprises. We handed the United States government a perfectly wrapped gift of corporate treason. The folder contained the exact routing numbers showing how the federal funds moved from my minority-certified business directly into the accounts of Oak Ridge Solutions. It contained the high-definition photographs of Julian playing the submissive servant to Wyatt at the country club. It contained the audio recordings of Julian and Wyatt bragging about bypassing diversity regulations. I built my minority certification with 40 years of blood, sweat, and tears fighting against a system designed to keep black men at the bottom. Wyatt and Julian turned my lifetime of struggle into a cheap loophole to steal taxpayer money. When the federal government realizes a privileged white family is using a black man as a disposable puppet to commit wire fraud, they do not send a polite letter in the mail. They send an absolute nightmare. I did not sleep a single wink that night. I sat in my velvet chair drinking a glass of water, just waiting for the sun to rise over the skyline. I knew exactly the kind of precision the federal government uses when they raid a corrupt corporate entity. At exactly 6 in the morning, the quiet upscale business park where Wyatt headquartered Oak Ridge Solutions was violently woken up. A fleet of black, unmarked sport utility vehicles swarmed the pristine parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt. Dozens of federal agents wearing heavy tactical gear and windbreakers with bright yellow letters printed on the back stormed the front entrance. They did not knock on the door and ask for the manager. They used a heavy steel battering ram to completely smash through the expensive glass doors of Wyatt corporate office. The agents flooded the building like a tidal wave, securing every single computer, every filing cabinet, and every financial server before any employee even arrived for work. 30 minutes later, Wyatt pulled his luxury car into the parking lot holding a cup of artisan coffee, completely unaware of the disaster waiting for him. The moment he stepped out of his vehicle, armed federal agents surrounded him. They immediately stripped him of his leather briefcase and confiscated his personal mobile phone. A senior agent stepped forward and formally informed Wyatt that his entire company was being seized under federal racketeering and fraud laws. Every single bank account tied to his name was indefinitely frozen. Wyatt watched his arrogant empire crumble into dust right before his eyes. The minority loophole he thought made him an untouchable genius had just guaranteed him a decade in a federal penitentiary. Before the agents could physically load him into the back of a federal vehicle, Wyatt begged them to let him make one single phone call to his family. The agents allowed it, monitoring his words closely. He dialed Vanessa. Keisha wiretap on Vanessa tablet caught every single sickening second of the conversation. Vanessa answered the phone half asleep, lying in her $15,000 custom bed. Wyatt did not say hello. His voice was a hysterical, high-pitched screech of pure, unadulterated terror and blinding rage. The sophisticated, polite country club gentleman was completely gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate animal lashing out at anything he could reach. "Vanessa," he screamed, his voice cracking so loudly it echoed through the bedroom. "The feds are here. They are taking everything. The company, the accounts, the government contracts, it is all gone. The feds know about the front company. You and your pathetic token black husband just killed me. You ruined my entire life. I am going to federal prison because of you two." He continued to scream, cursing her and Julian with words so vile and profoundly racist they proved exactly what he and his family had always thought of my son. He called Julian a disposable monkey who could not even commit fraud correctly. Vanessa dropped her phone. The device hit the hardwood floor, leaving Wyatt screaming his racist venom through the speaker until the federal agents finally ended the call. Vanessa sat frozen in her expensive bed, her face completely pale as the terrifying reality finally set in. The federal government was not just coming for her brother. The avalanche had started, and it was coming to bury all of them alive. The morning of the federal raid on Wyatt brought a strange and heavy silence to my hotel penthouse. I sat in my velvet chair looking out over the city, knowing that a massive shockwave was currently tearing through the arrogant foundation of Vanessa and her family. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had seized Oak Ridge Solutions, and the panic was spreading like wildfire. But the federal government only cares about the financial crimes. They care about the wire fraud and the stolen taxpayer dollars. They do not care about the betrayal of a father or the absolute destruction of a family. That part of the execution was entirely up to me, and to complete that execution I needed to show my son exactly what kind of monsters he had sold his soul to protect. My grandniece Keisha is a digital phantom. While Vanessa was running around her bedroom in a blind panic after Wyatt screamed at her over the phone, Keisha was quietly working her magic on the encrypted cloud servers. Keisha had used the initial tablet wiretap to gain full access to Vanessa's personal digital storage. She bypassed the secondary security measures and downloaded a massive archive of private text messages and deleted emails between Vanessa and her brother Wyatt. These were the conversations they had in the dead of night. These were the raw, unfiltered thoughts of two people who believed they were completely untouchable. Keisha compiled the data into a single master file and sent it directly to my secure laptop. When I opened that file, I thought I was prepared for anything. I had already seen them steal my money. I had already watched them try to throw me out on the street to die. But nothing could have prepared me for the sheer absolute sickness of their private words. I sat alone in the quiet room and read through 3 years of their daily text messages. They never saw Julian as a husband or a brother-in-law. They never even saw him as a human being. In their private chats, they referred to my son using words so deeply racist and utterly vile that it made my stomach turn. Wyatt constantly called Julian the useful idiot monkey. He joked about how easy it was to train Julian to fetch the federal contracts just by throwing him a few scraps of high society approval. Vanessa did not defend her husband. She laughed along with her brother. She replied with laughing emojis and agreed that Julian was just a temporary tool, a stepping stone to secure their permanent wealth. The messages went deeper into their hatred. They mocked my entire existence and the 40 years of blood and sweat I sacrificed for them. Vanessa complained about the smell of my work boots and the roughness of my hands, calling me a filthy garbage man who simply got lucky. She told Wyatt how physically sick it made her to sit across from me at the Thanksgiving table. She said the only reason she could stomach being in the same room as my black family was because she knew she was going to eventually own every single dime I had ever made. She despised our culture, our history, and our presence, but she absolutely loved our bank accounts. Reading those words, I felt a profound sorrow, not for myself, but for my late wife, Gloria. Gloria had raised Julian to be proud of his heritage. She had taught him to walk with dignity and to never let anyone make him feel inferior. And yet, Julian had willingly crawled into a cage built by people who viewed him as an animal. He swallowed their microaggressions and their condescending smiles because he was too weak to stand on his own 2 feet. But the most devastating part of the archive was their ultimate exit strategy. Julian thought he was building a legacy with his wife. He thought they were a team fighting for their future. He was willing to commit federal treason because he believed Vanessa would always stand by his side. The text messages revealed the absolute horrifying opposite. Wyatt and Vanessa had a meticulously detailed plan from the very beginning. They knew the minority business loophole was highly illegal. They knew that if the government ever investigated the contracts, the federal agents would look directly at the signature on the bottom line. And Julian had eagerly signed every single piece of paper they put in front of him. Vanessa wrote to Wyatt saying that as soon as the offshore accounts reached $10 million, she was going to file for a sudden divorce. She was going to claim emotional abuse, take half of the clean assets, and leave Julian completely holding the bag for the federal fraud. Wyatt replied that they would just anonymously tip off the authorities and let the stupid monkey take the fall. They were actively planning to send the boy I raised to a maximum security federal penitentiary just to cover their own tracks. They were going to let him rot in a concrete cell while they spent my hard-earned money on European vacations and country club memberships. Julian had betrayed his father, his race, and his own morals to serve a family that was actively measuring him for a prison uniform. He sold his soul for a seat at a table where he was literally the main course. I did not yell. I did not throw the laptop across the room. I felt a cold, absolute clarity wash over my mind. Julian needed to see this. He needed to read every single word. But I was not going to just hand him a cheap printout or forward him a digital file. I wanted this revelation to be a physical heavy object. I wanted the delivery to match the absolute magnitude of the betrayal. I called my lawyer Donovan and gave him a very specific task. I sent him the complete transcript of the most racist, manipulative, and destructive text messages from the archive. I told him to take those pages to a boutique custom bookbindery located in the financial district. I did not want a simple spiral-bound notebook. I wanted a masterpiece of craftsmanship. I paid them triple their usual rate to complete the job in a matter of hours. By late afternoon, Donovan returned to my penthouse. He walked in holding a small, thick book. It was absolutely stunning. It was bound in the highest quality imported black leather. The edges of the thick parchment paper were lined with real gold leaf. It looked like a priceless family heirloom or an ancient religious text. It was the kind of book that demanded absolute respect the moment you held it in your hands. I took the book from Donovan and slowly ran my calloused fingers over the smooth leather cover. Inside this beautiful, luxurious shell was the ugliest, most disgusting truth imaginable. It was the perfect physical representation of Vanessa and her entire family. A pristine, wealthy exterior hiding a rotten, racist, and parasitic core. I placed the leather-bound book gently on the glass coffee table. The trap had already been sprung and the federal government was already tearing Wyatt apart. Now it was time to tear my ungrateful son away from his delusions. It was time for him to open the book and read the absolute truth about the people he had thrown his own father away to protect. The sound of Wyatt screaming through the dropped phone was still echoing in the master bedroom of my estate. I sat in my hotel penthouse listening to the live audio feed my grandniece Keisha had established. Vanessa was entirely silent for a very long time. The reality of the federal raid on her brother company was sinking into her mind. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was not just a local police force you could bribe or intimidate with a fancy lawyer. The federal government had infinite resources, and they were currently dismantling the exact same fraudulent empire she had helped build. Parasites have a very specific survival instinct. When the host body begins to die, the parasite does not stay and try to heal the wounds. The parasite detaches and frantically looks for a way to save itself. Vanessa did not run downstairs to wake up my son, Julian. She did not shake her husband and tell him they needed to hire defense attorneys or prepare for a massive legal battle. Julian was sleeping in the guest room, oblivious to the massive storm that was about to rip the roof off his life. Vanessa made her decision in complete silence. She was going to execute the exit strategy she and Wyatt had always planned, but she was going to do it right now. I listened through the audio feed as she dragged her heavy designer suitcases out of the custom walk-in closet. The microphone picked up the frantic zipping of bags and the rustling of expensive silk clothing. She was moving with the desperate speed of a cornered animal. She was abandoning the $15,000 sofa she loved so much. She was abandoning the grand estate she had stolen. And most importantly, she was abandoning the man who had sold out his own father just to make her happy. Julian was about to wake up in an empty house facing a mountain of federal charges entirely alone while his wife was drinking champagne on an international flight. Vanessa moved quickly to the wall safe. She punched in the code and emptied whatever emergency cash they had managed to hide away. She threw her own personal diamond rings and expensive watches into a small leather travel case. She did not take a single picture of Julian. She did not leave a note. Her entire relationship with my son had been nothing but a long, calculated transaction, and the transaction was officially over. The account was empty, so she was closing the book. I watched the digital activity log on my secure laptop. Keisha had mirrored Vanessa's personal computer. I could see exactly what Vanessa was looking at on her screen. She had opened a private web browser and navigated to an international airline website. She was not booking a domestic flight to go hide at a relative house. She was looking at one-way first-class tickets to a small European country that had a very complicated extradition treaty with the United States. The ticket cost $12,000. For a woman who had just spent $50,000 of my money on modern art, a $12,000 flight was absolute pocket change. She quickly typed her passenger details into the booking form. She pulled out her primary premium black card, the one tied to the massive offshore accounts where they had been hiding the stolen federal funds. She entered the 16-digit number and clicked the bright green purchase button. I sat in my velvet chair and waited for the system to process the request. On her screen, a small loading wheel spun for a few agonizing seconds. Then the screen flashed a bright red error message stating the transaction was declined and requesting her to contact her financial institution. Through the audio feed, I heard Vanessa let out a sharp, frustrated sigh. She assumed it was just a simple security trigger because it was an international purchase made early in the morning. She muttered a quiet curse word and reached into her wallet for a second card. This was her personal platinum credit card, the one Julian had aggressively increased the limit on just a few days ago. She typed in the new numbers and clicked purchase again. The wheel spun. The red error message appeared again, stating the transaction was declined. Vanessa's breathing started to become rapid and shallow. The illusion of her endless wealth was starting to crack. She was sweating, shivering in the air-conditioned bedroom. She frantically grabbed a third card. This was a direct debit card tied to her private savings account, an account she had kept completely separate from Julian just in case of an emergency exactly like this one. She slammed her fingers against the keyboard, entering the numbers with absolute desperation. She clicked the button. This time the screen did not just decline the transaction. The banking system initiated a hard security lock. A bold, terrifying message appeared on the screen stating that the card had been permanently disabled due to severe compliance violations and that all associated accounts were under mandatory review. Vanessa let out a panicked whimpering sound. The audio feed picked up the sound of her pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor. She was a woman who had never been told no in her entire privileged life. She picked up her mobile phone. Her hands were shaking so violently I could hear the device tapping against her diamond earrings as she held it to the side of her face. She dialed the 24-hour elite concierge service for her private bank. She was expecting a polite customer service agent to immediately apologize and unlock her funds. I listened as the call connected. A stern professional voice answered the line. It was not a standard customer service representative. Vanessa had been automatically routed to the high-risk legal compliance division. "Listen to me," Vanessa demanded, her voice shrill and dripping with arrogant entitlement. "I am a premium-tier client. I am trying to book a flight and your system is declining all of my cards. I have millions of dollars in those accounts. I need you to lift the security block right this second. Do you know who I am?" The representative on the phone did not apologize. The representative did not ask for her account PIN or her mother's maiden name. The response was completely cold and utterly devoid of mercy. "Ma'am," the representative said, speaking with the absolute authority of a federal mandate. "We know exactly who you are. We received a direct legal injunction from the United States Department of Justice at 6 o'clock this morning. Your accounts are not experiencing a technical glitch. Every single financial asset registered to your name, your social security number, and your affiliated businesses has been indefinitely frozen." Vanessa stopped pacing. She stood perfectly still in the middle of her bedroom, surrounded by her packed designer suitcases. "What are you talking about?" she gasped, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "You cannot do that. That is my money." The representative continued, ignoring her panic. "The freeze has been executed under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, commonly known as the RICO Act. You are currently listed as an active person of interest in a massive ongoing federal investigation regarding corporate wire fraud and the embezzlement of government funds." Vanessa's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the edge of the mattress, clutching the phone with a white-knuckled grip. "Because the assets are frozen under federal criminal statutes," the representative stated firmly, "no funds can be moved, withdrawn, or transferred. Furthermore, your passport has been flagged by the Transportation Security Administration. Any attempt to board an international or domestic flight will result in your immediate detention by federal authorities at the airport. You cannot leave the country, ma'am. If you require further information, I highly suggest you contact a criminal defense attorney immediately." The line went completely dead. A flat, empty dial tone echoed through the bedroom. Vanessa dropped the phone onto the floor. She looked at her packed luggage. She looked at the expensive clothes and the stolen jewelry. The millions of dollars she thought she had successfully stolen were completely out of reach, locked away behind an impenetrable federal wall. She was completely broke. She was a prime suspect in a massive federal conspiracy, and she was permanently trapped inside the country with absolutely nowhere to run. I reached over and closed my laptop. The silence in my hotel room was golden. The parasite had tried to flee the sinking ship, but I had already chained her to the steering wheel. She was going down with the very same vessel she had tried to destroy. The walls were finally closing in on my ungrateful son, and the reality of his monumental betrayal was crashing down around him. The federal government moves with a slow but absolutely unstoppable and terrifying momentum. While Vanessa was pacing around the master bedroom of the estate, realizing she was permanently trapped inside the country without a single dime to her name, Julian was about to receive his own devastating wake-up call. I was sitting at the glass dining table in my hotel penthouse going over the final corporate restructuring documents with my attorney Donovan when my secure burner phone began to vibrate violently against the glass. The caller identification displayed the private number of my son. Julian had not tried to call me a single time since the moment he shoved me to the marble floor of the bank lobby and told the security guards to throw me out onto the street. He did not care if I was freezing on a park bench or dying alone in a charity hospital ward. He only cared about his own survival and his own comfort. I sat back in my velvet chair and let the phone ring 4 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to feel the exact same suffocating, helpless panic he had so eagerly tried to inflict on me. Finally, I picked up the device and pressed the answer button. I did not say a word. I just breathed heavily into the microphone, playing the role of the exhausted, dying old man. Dad Julian sobbed into the receiver, his voice cracking with a pathetic, high-pitched hysteria that echoed through the quiet penthouse. "Dad, please, you have to help me right now. They are coming for me." 2 federal agents just showed up at the corporate headquarters and handed me a grand jury subpoena. They are investigating the minority business contracts. They mentioned Wyatt, and they mentioned the offshore wire transfers. They want to bring me in for formal questioning this afternoon, and they are threatening to freeze my assets. Julian was hyperventilating, completely losing his mind. The arrogant corporate executive who used to mock my calloused hands and laugh at the country club with his racist friends was completely gone. In his place was a terrified little boy begging his father to clean up his massive, catastrophic mess. He still truly believed I was entirely ignorant of the massive conspiracy. He thought I was just a sick, confused old man who had no idea that he had been funneling millions of federal taxpayer dollars to his arrogant brother-in-law. "Please, Dad. You know all the judges and the powerful politicians in this city," Julian cried out, weeping openly into the phone. "You have to call your high-powered lawyers. You have to tell the federal agents that it was all a big misunderstanding and that the paperwork was just a clerical error. I am your son, Dad. You cannot let me go to a federal prison." I listened to his desperate weeping and felt absolutely nothing. There was no pity left in my failing heart, and there was no fatherly instinct urging me to protect him. "Julian, my boy," I whispered, making my voice sound incredibly weak and raspy, forcing a fake wet cough into the receiver. "I am so tired today. My chest hurts so much. I have been staying at a small motel just trying to rest my heart." Julian did not ask what motel I was at. He did not ask if I had seen a doctor or if I had eaten anything in the past 3 days. He only cared about the federal agents breathing down his neck. "I will help you, son," I murmured, keeping up the brilliant charade. "I already spoke to Donovan this morning about getting you some legal protection. But Donovan said that because you are the acting chief executive officer, he cannot legally represent you against a federal subpoena unless you sign a formal legal representation authorization. It temporarily transfers your corporate liability over to my legal team so we can step in and fight the federal government on your behalf." Julian did not even hesitate. He eagerly agreed to whatever I proposed. He asked where he needed to go. I gave him the address of a quiet, upscale hotel located on the edge of the financial district. I told him to meet me in conference room B on the 2nd floor in exactly 1 hour. I hung up the phone and looked across the table at Donovan. Donovan did not smile, but his eyes gleamed with the cold, mechanical precision of a legal executioner. He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a single crisp piece of heavy parchment paper. It looked like a standard corporate authorization form, It had the official Holloway Logistics letterhead printed at the top and a series of dense legal paragraphs formatted in a very small professional font. But Donovan had drafted a masterpiece of absolute legal destruction. We arrived at the hotel conference room 45 minutes later. The room was dimly lit, heavily air-conditioned, and completely sterile. It featured a long mahogany table and heavy leather executive chairs. I sat at the far end of the table, hunching my shoulders forward and taking slow, deliberate breaths. I needed to look like a man who was barely holding on to his life. Donovan stood silently in the corner shadows holding the printed document. Exactly on time, the heavy wooden door burst open. Julian practically fell into the room. He looked absolutely horrendous. His expensive designer suit was wrinkled and heavily stained with nervous sweat. His silk tie was pulled loose, and his eyes were bloodshot and swollen from crying. He looked exactly like a cornered rat frantically searching for a way to escape a sinking ship. Julian did not run over to hug his dying father. He did not ask how I was surviving after he allowed his wife to lock me out of my own estate. He marched straight to the mahogany table, his eyes wide with blind terror. "Where is the paper?" he demanded, his voice shaking uncontrollably as he leaned over the wood. "Where is the authorization? The federal agents told me I have to surrender to the downtown field office by 3 o'clock. I need Donovan to come with me and shut this entire federal investigation down right now." I slowly looked up at my son, letting out a pathetic, rattling cough. Donovan stepped out of the shadows and placed the crisp white document flat on the table right in front of Julian. Donovan also placed a heavy gold fountain pen directly next to the paper. "This is the authorization," Julian Donovan said, his voice perfectly flat and professional. "You need to sign the bottom line right now so we can immediately intercept the federal prosecutors before they file the official indictment." Julian snatched the gold pen. He was breathing so heavily I could hear the air rattling in his throat. He did not read the bold heading at the top of the page. He did not scan the subheadings or question the lack of standard corporate formatting. He did not ask Donovan to explain the complex legal terminology buried in the center paragraphs. He was a complete coward operating on pure, blinding adrenaline. He thought he was signing a magical shield that would protect him from the severe consequences of his own monumental greed. He gripped the pen and aggressively scribbled his signature across the dotted line, permanently sealing his own fate without reading a single word. Julian dropped the pen onto the wood. He let out a massive sigh of relief, violently wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Thank you, Dad," he panted, completely oblivious to the brutal reality of his situation. "I knew you would fix this for me. I am going to go wait in the lobby for Donovan to get his briefcase." He turned around and rushed out of the conference room, leaving the heavy wooden door to click shut behind him. I sat up perfectly straight in my leather chair. My fake trembling completely vanished, and my breathing returned to a slow, powerful rhythm. I reached across the table and picked up the document my son had just signed. It was not a legal representation authorization. It was a comprehensive, unconditional letter of voluntary resignation. But it was far worse than simply losing his executive job. Buried deeply in the dense legal text was a legally binding admission of solitary financial and criminal responsibility. Julian had just legally sworn under penalty of perjury that every single fraudulent minority contract, every illegal offshore wire transfer, and every stolen federal dollar was executed entirely by him as a rogue individual. He officially declared that he acted without the knowledge or consent of the Holloway Logistics Board of Directors. He had officially stripped himself of his multi-million-dollar corporate legal protections and transferred every single ounce of civil and criminal liability directly onto his own personal shoulders. Julian thought he had just hired a lawyer to save him from the storm. He had absolutely no idea he had just permanently signed his own 20-year federal prison sentence. Desperation makes greedy people do incredibly foolish things. My son Julian and his wife Vanessa were completely trapped. The federal government had raided her brother Wyatt and seized his entire company. Vanessa had her personal accounts frozen by the Department of Justice and was permanently grounded from leaving the country. Julian had just signed away his entire corporate legal protection without even reading the paperwork. They were two rats drowning in a sinking ship, actively tearing each other apart behind closed doors. But when it comes to survival, parasites will always form a temporary alliance to find a new host. They needed money. They needed high-powered criminal defense attorneys. And to get those things, they needed to officially seize complete control of Holloway Logistics and unlock the main corporate treasury. On a Tuesday morning, they called an emergency meeting of my board of directors. The meeting was held in the grand boardroom on the top floor of my corporate headquarters. It is a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I helped build from the dirt up. Around the long, polished mahogany table sat 12 of my most trusted senior executives. These were men and women who had worked by my side for decades helping me build the empire. They sat in their heavy leather chairs murmuring in confusion and concern. They had seen the viral social media videos. They had heard the terrible rumors. Julian stood at the head of the table, occupying my chair. He was wearing a brand new navy blue suit, trying desperately to project absolute authority. But the dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his deep, suffocating panic. Standing right beside him was Vanessa. She was dressed in a sharp, conservative black dress, looking like a grieving vulture, ready to feast on a fresh carcass. She held a thick stack of manila folders, completely convinced that she was about to become the queen of the empire and save herself from federal prison. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Julian began, his voice projecting a perfectly manufactured tone of deep sorrow. "Thank you for assembling on such short notice. I come to you today with a very heavy heart. As some of you may have heard, my father, Victor Holloway, suffered a massive and catastrophic medical event last week." A murmur of genuine shock and concern rippled through the board members. Julian raised his hand to silence them, playing the part of the brave, grieving son to absolute perfection. "He survived the initial physical heart attack," Julian continued, wiping a completely fake tear from the corner of his eye. "But the doctors have informed us that the lack of oxygen to his brain has caused rapid and irreversible cognitive decline. He has been officially diagnosed with advanced aggressive dementia. He is currently confined to a secure medical facility, completely unaware of his surroundings and unable to speak for himself." Vanessa stepped forward on cue. She opened her folders and began sliding glossy, highly official-looking medical documents across the polished mahogany table. These were the fake psychiatric evaluations she had purchased from the corrupt Dr. Kendrick for $20,000 in cash. She slid them toward my chief financial officer and my lead operations director. She looked at the executives with a perfectly practiced expression of profound sadness. "These are the certified evaluations from his primary care physicians," Vanessa said smoothly, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "They confirm that Victor is entirely mentally incompetent. He can no longer make rational decisions for himself, let alone for a multi-million-dollar corporation. It is a tragic end for a great man, but we must protect the future of this company. Especially now with the current federal misunderstandings regarding our government contracts, we need strong, decisive leadership. We need to unify behind Julian to protect the legacy Victor built." Julian placed his hands flat on the table, leaning forward to look at the board. "Therefore, according to the corporate bylaws regarding medical incapacitation, I am formally submitting my petition to be recognized immediately as the permanent chief executive officer of Holloway Logistics. I need the board to vote right now to grant me absolute unhindered access to the main corporate treasury so we can navigate these turbulent waters and hire the necessary legal counsel to clear our name." The board members exchanged very uneasy glances. My chief financial officer, a sharp woman named Sarah, who had balanced my books for 20 years, frowned deeply at the paperwork. "This is highly irregular, Julian," she said cautiously. "Victor was perfectly fine the last time he was in this office. We cannot just hand over the entire treasury without a proper legal transition and verification from our own corporate medical team. The federal investigations alone are a massive red flag. We need time to review this." Julian's jaw tightened. He did not have time for verification. He had federal agents breathing down his neck and a wife who was ready to throw him under the bus. There is no time for delays. Sarah Julian snapped, his fake grief instantly replaced by arrogant irritation. "I am his son, and I am the acting executive. I demand that we vote to formalize my position right this second. If you refuse to vote, I will have the legal team remove you from your position." Vanessa, completely drunk on her own fabricated victory, nodded in agreement. She truly believed they had cornered the board. She thought the old black man was locked away in a sterile white room, slowly losing his mind, waiting to die. She thought the millions of dollars in the corporate treasury were just moments away from being transferred into her pocket. They were completely, devastatingly wrong. 3 floors down, I had just stepped out of my private executive elevator. I was not wearing a wrinkled shirt. I was not leaning on a cane. I was not sitting in a wheelchair. I was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal gray Tom Ford suit that cost more than Vanessa's entire frozen bank account. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. My gold watch rested heavily on my wrist. My posture was perfectly straight and my shoulders were broad. I walked with the exact same quiet, commanding strength I used to build this empire 40 years ago. I looked like a man who could buy and sell the entire room without blinking. Walking right beside me was my lead attorney, Donovan, and walking directly behind us were two very large, very serious federal agents wearing dark suits and carrying heavy badges. These were the exact same agents who had arrested Dr. Kendrick in the coffee shop parking lot. We walked down the thick carpet of the executive hallway. I did not knock on the boardroom doors. I did not ask for permission to enter my own kingdom. I placed my hands on the heavy brass handles and pushed the massive oak doors wide open. The heavy doors hit the walls with a loud, thunderous crack that echoed violently through the entire room. Vanessa gasped and dropped the remaining medical folders. The papers scattered all over the mahogany table. She froze, staring at the doorway in absolute paralyzing horror. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a walking corpse. She recognized the federal agents immediately, and her breathing completely stopped. Julian stumbled backward. His legs tangled in his own feet, and he practically fell out of the heavy leather executive chair. He stared at me as if I were a ghost rising straight from the grave. The entire board of directors gasped. Sarah, my chief financial officer, let out a massive sigh of relief and leaned back in her chair, a knowing smile crossing her face. The other executives sat up perfectly straight, realizing that the true king had just returned to his throne. I walked slowly and deliberately to the head of the table. My footsteps were the only sound in the dead, suffocating silence of the room. I stopped right next to Julian. He was trembling so violently that he had to grip the edge of the mahogany table just to stay on his feet. The two federal agents stepped into the room and closed the heavy doors behind them, standing like stone statues blocking the only exit. Julian looked at the federal agents and then looked up at my face. His mind was completely shattering, trying to process the impossible reality standing right in front of him. The man he thought was a frail, broken victim was actually the ultimate predator. "You are supposed to be sick," Julian stammered, his voice nothing but a pathetic, high-pitched whisper. "Dad, you are not sick." I did not raise my voice. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crisp, clean document. It was a certified, notarized medical clearance from the chief of cardiology at the Central Hospital, proving my heart and my mind were in perfect condition. I tossed the paper onto the center of the table, right on top of Vanessa's fake psychiatric evaluation. "I am very healthy, Julian," I said, my voice deep, smooth, and echoing with absolute chilling authority. "I am healthy enough to dig your graves with my own hands." The silence in the grand boardroom was so absolute it felt incredibly heavy. I stood perfectly still at the head of the mahogany table. Julian was frozen in place, staring at the clean bill of health I had just thrown down. He backed away slowly, his feet tangling together as if he had completely forgotten how to walk. I did not rush. I smoothed the front of my tailored suit and took my rightful seat in the heavy leather executive chair. The chair creaked loudly in the quiet room. I looked around the table at the 12 senior executives who had helped me build Holloway Logistics over the last 40 years. They were looking at my son and his wife with a mixture of profound shock and absolute disgust. I turned my attention to Donovan, my lead corporate attorney. I gave him a single slow nod. Donovan walked over to the digital control panel mounted on the wood-paneled wall. He pressed a button and the heavy velvet curtains automatically swept across the floor to ceiling windows, blocking out the morning sun. The room was plunged into a cool, dim shadow. A massive projector screen hummed as it lowered from the ceiling right behind my chair. Donovan tapped the screen of his tablet and the projector flared to life. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the calm, cold precision of a judge delivering a final verdict. I told the board of directors to look at the screen. Projected in glowing high-definition letters were the internal bank statements, the federal infrastructure contracts, and the highly classified routing numbers of our corporate treasury. I walked them through the entire criminal conspiracy step by step. I explained how Julian had weaponized our minority-owned business enterprise certification. I told them how he used my name and my 40 years of struggle to bypass federal bidding laws. I pointed to the massive red numbers proving that 95% of the taxpayer funds were instantly funneled out of our company within 24 hours. The money was wired directly into the private accounts of Oak Ridge Solutions. The board members gasped as the ownership documents for Oak Ridge flashed on the screen, showing the smiling, arrogant face of Wyatt. Sarah, my chief financial officer, gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. She shook her head in sheer disbelief as the magnitude of the wire fraud became undeniable. Julian had not just stolen from his family. He had committed massive corporate treason and exposed every single person in this room to a catastrophic federal investigation. Vanessa tried to shrink away from the glaring light of the projector. She looked frantically at the two federal agents standing like statues blocking the boardroom doors. She knew the walls were rapidly closing in, but parasites will always try to lie their way out of a trap. She opened her mouth, her lips trembling, trying to formulate a pathetic excuse, claiming she knew nothing about the contracts. I did not let her speak a single word. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope. I tossed it across the polished mahogany. It slid perfectly to a stop right in front of her shaking hands. I told her to look inside. Vanessa hesitated, her breathing shallow and rapid. She slowly opened the flap and pulled out the contents. They were high-resolution glossy photographs taken by my grandniece Keisha. The pictures clearly showed Vanessa sitting in the secluded coffee shop, sliding a thick envelope of $20,000 in cash across the table to Dr. Kendrick. I told the room that the psychiatric evaluation she had just presented to them was a complete fabrication, bought and paid for by a desperate, greedy woman. I told Vanessa that her corrupt doctor had already been arrested by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and was currently singing like a bird to save himself from a 20-year prison sentence. The color completely vanished from Vanessa's face, leaving her looking like a pale, terrified ghost. Her arrogant high society mask shattered into a million unfixable pieces. She finally realized that every single move she made over the past week, every secret meeting, every stolen piece of jewelry, and every phone call had been meticulously monitored and orchestrated by me. But the financial and legal destruction was only the first part of the execution. The federal agents were here to handle the corporate fraud, but I was here to handle my family. I turned my gaze back to Julian. He was sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an escape that did not exist. I gave Donovan a second nod. Donovan reached into his heavy, reinforced leather briefcase. He began pulling out the custom-made black leather books. These were the books I had commissioned the day before, bound in premium imported leather with pages lined in real gold leaf. They looked like priceless ancient texts, but they contained the ugliest truth in the world. Donovan walked slowly around the massive table, placing one beautiful book directly in front of every single board member. He placed the final book right in front of Julian. Julian stared down at the dark leather cover, his hands trembling uncontrollably. I told the room to open the books. I explained that inside those pristine pages were 3 years of heavily encrypted private text messages between Vanessa and her brother Wyatt. I looked directly at the son I had sacrificed my entire youth to protect. I told Julian to read the words written by the woman he had sold his soul to impress. Julian slowly opened the heavy cover. His shaking fingers turned the first crisp page. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The only sound was the soft rustling of paper and the rapid, ragged breathing of my son as his eyes darted across the printed text. He read the messages where Wyatt constantly referred to him as a useful idiot monkey. He read the messages where Vanessa laughed at my blue-collar roots, complaining about the smell of my work boots and calling my life of hard work nothing but filthy luck. He read their detailed master plan to drain the corporate accounts and then anonymously report him to the federal authorities. He read the exact, undeniable words proving that his wife was planning to file for a sudden divorce the moment the offshore accounts were full. She was planning to leave him completely holding the bag for the federal fraud. He saw the laughing emojis she sent when Wyatt joked about how easy it was to manipulate a stupid black man who was desperate to be accepted by a privileged white family. The illusion Julian had built his entire adult life upon was completely, violently eradicated. He read the absolute proof that he was never a respected husband or an equal partner. He was just a disposable tool holding the door open to the vault. He had betrayed the father who loved him, he had betrayed the race that birthed him, and he had betrayed the legacy that fed him. He had given up everything just for a seat at a table where he was considered nothing more than an animal serving the main course. Julian let out a sound that will echo in my mind forever. It was not a normal cry or a simple scream. It was a hollow, guttural sob tearing from the very bottom of his chest. It was the sound of a man whose entire universe had just collapsed into a pile of worthless dust. His legs gave out completely. He dropped to his knees on the floor of the boardroom right in front of the executives and the federal agents. He buried his face in his trembling hands and wept with a pathetic, agonizing despair. His world was entirely gone, and he had no one to blame but himself. The room was heavy with the sound of my son weeping on the floor. He had just read the absolute truth about his marriage. He had read the racist venom his wife and her brother had spewed behind his back. The boardroom of Holloway Logistics was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. 12 of my most trusted senior executives sat frozen in their leather chairs. They watched the arrogant boy who had tried to steal my empire completely fall apart. But parasites do not mourn the destruction of their hosts. Parasites only care about finding a way to survive the fire. Vanessa stood near the mahogany table. She looked at the 2 large federal agents standing by the heavy oak doors. She looked at the glossy photographs of her bribing the corrupt doctor. She looked at the leather-bound book containing her disgusting text messages. The high society illusion was completely destroyed. The fake aristocratic mask she wore for years was shattered into a million unfixable pieces. Vanessa realized the ship was rapidly sinking, and she needed to find a lifeboat immediately. She did exactly what she and her brother Wyatt had planned to do from the very beginning. She threw my son directly to the wolves. The arrogant daughter-in-law vanished. She forced her breathing to become rapid and shallow. She squeezed her eyes shut until completely fake tears began to stream down her pale cheeks. She pointed a manicured, trembling finger directly at her husband, who was still kneeling and sobbing on the floor. It was him, Vanessa screamed, her voice echoing shrilly through the silent boardroom. It was all him, Victor. You have to believe me. I had absolutely nothing to do with stealing the government money. He is a monster behind closed doors. He controlled all the finances, and he manipulated my brother Wyatt into taking those contracts. I am just an innocent wife. I did not know anything about the fraud. He forced me to go meet that doctor and buy those fake medical papers. He threatened to leave me with nothing if I did not help him push you out of the company. I was terrified of him. It was a masterclass in manipulation and deceit. She was actively trying to rewrite reality in front of a room full of people who had just read her own words. Sarah, my chief financial officer, looked physically sickened by the display. The executives stared at Vanessa with pure, unadulterated disgust. Julian slowly lifted his head from the carpet. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked at the woman he had destroyed his entire life for. He looked at the woman who had mocked his race and constantly pushed him to demand more power. And now, she was throwing him directly into a federal prison without a second thought, just to save her own skin. Julian opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came out. He was completely emotionally devastated. He just let out a hollow, broken gasp and lowered his head back down. The rats were finally biting each other in the dark. I sat in my heavy leather chair at the head of the table. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue with her ridiculous lies. I just watched her perform, waiting for the final curtain to fall. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to my lead attorney, Donovan. Donovan stepped out of the shadows. He did not smile. He executes his duties with the cold, mechanical precision of an executioner swinging a very heavy axe. He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a single thick red legal folder. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Donovan announced, his voice projecting clearly across the massive room. "Please be assured that Holloway Logistics is entirely secure. There will be no hostile takeover. There is no medical conservatorship. The fraudulent claims have been neutralized. Furthermore, we have already executed a massive restructuring of the executive hierarchy to completely purge the corruption from this building." Donovan then turned his cold gaze down to Julian. "Julian," Donovan said firmly, "I have here the fully notarized and legally binding document you eagerly signed yesterday afternoon in the hotel conference room." Julian blinked, his shattered mind trying to process the words. He stammered, saying he just signed a standard legal representation authorization so Donovan could protect him from the federal subpoena. He said he needed the company to shield him. It was not a protection authorization, Donovan stated, pulling the crisp white pages from the red folder and dropping them onto the mahogany table right in front of Julian. "You signed a comprehensive, unconditional letter of resignation. You voluntarily relinquished your title as Chief Executive Officer. Furthermore, you signed a legally binding admission of solitary financial and criminal responsibility. You officially declared under penalty of perjury that every single fraudulent minority contract and every stolen federal dollar was executed entirely by you as a rogue individual. As of yesterday, you are no longer employed by this corporation in any capacity, and you have entirely stripped yourself of all corporate legal protections. The sheer magnitude of the legal annihilation hit Julian like a physical blow to the chest. He was not just fired, he had willingly handed the federal government a full signed confession. But Donovan was not finished loading the dirt onto the coffin. Based on your documented attempts to misappropriate corporate funds and commit massive federal wire fraud, the breach of fiduciary duty clause has been officially triggered. Donovan continued relentlessly. Your equity shares in this company have been forcefully seized by the corporate treasury. You own absolutely nothing here. Your corporate credit cards are permanently canceled. Your access badges are deactivated. Vanessa stopped crying for a moment. She looked up, her face a horrific mask of smeared makeup and pure panic. The house, she whispered, her voice cracking. What about our house? We still have our mansion. We can sell it. We can hire lawyers and fight this. I finally spoke. I leaned forward in my chair, looking down at the two parasites who had tried to bury me alive. You do not have a house, I said, my voice echoing like thunder in the silent boardroom. Yesterday, your arrogant brother Wyatt demanded that Julian take out a massive commercial mortgage on my estate to pay off the angry subcontractors. Julian was foolish enough to submit the paperwork to the central bank. But my old friend David, the senior branch manager, immediately flagged the fraudulent loan application. Julian attempted to leverage a property that was owned entirely by my corporate trust. That is textbook bank fraud. David instantly triggered an emergency foreclosure protocol on your unauthorized debt. The bank seized the estate at 8 o'clock this morning. The local sheriff department has already changed the locks again. The luxury cars you drove here today have already been towed from the executive parking garage. You are completely penniless, and you are millions of dollars in debt. The absolute undeniable reality of their situation finally crushed them completely. They were broke. They were homeless. They were facing massive federal legal battles, and they had absolutely no one left to manipulate. I looked up at the two large federal agents standing by the heavy oak doors. Gentlemen, I said smoothly, the corporate transition is complete. You may proceed with your official duties. The federal agents stepped forward into the room. They pulled heavy steel handcuffs from their utility belts. Vanessa let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She fought against the agents, kicking and shrieking about her designer dress and her ruined life. She demanded to call her own lawyers, completely forgetting that her bank accounts had been frozen by the Department of Justice earlier that morning. She was a parasite that had finally been ripped away from her host, and the exposure to the real world was destroying her. The cold metal clicked tightly around her wrists, silencing her fake aristocratic pride forever. Julian did not fight. He was a completely broken shell of a man. The federal agent pulled his arms behind his back and locked the handcuffs into place. But before they could drag him out of the room, Julian completely snapped. He dropped to his knees, dragging himself across the expensive carpet. He crawled right up to the side of my heavy leather chair. He reached out with his cuffed hands and grabbed the fabric of my tailored pant leg. He wept uncontrollably, his tears soaking into my shoes. Dad. Julian wailed, his voice tearing through the boardroom in a high-pitched, desperate shriek. Dad, please save me. Please do not let them take me to prison. I am so sorry. I made a mistake. I was confused. Vanessa manipulated me. Wyatt manipulated me. I did not mean any of it. Please, Dad, I am your son. You have to save me. He buried his face into my leg, begging for the mercy he had ruthlessly denied me when I was standing in my own living room struggling to breathe. He thought my heart was still soft enough to save him. He thought the decades of history we shared would act as a shield against the consequences of his absolute evil. I built this company from a single rusted garbage truck. I fought for 40 years to secure a legacy for my bloodline. I endured the disrespect of a society that wanted to see me fail just so Julian would never have to struggle. And he took that legacy and handed it to a family that called him a monkey behind his back. The absolute tragedy of his weakness was overwhelming, but it was no longer my burden to carry. I looked down at the top of his head. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I did not feel sorrow. The space in my heart where my son used to live had completely scarred over. I slowly reached down and firmly grabbed his trembling shoulders. I pushed him away and smoothly pulled my leg back, creating a hard physical distance between us. Julian looked up at me. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a terror he had never known in his pampered, privileged life. I looked him dead in the eyes, ensuring my words would be burned into his memory for the rest of his miserable existence in a concrete cell. That afternoon in my living room, when I asked for a glass of water and a place to sit, I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any human warmth, "Your wife looked at me in absolute disgust, and she told you to throw this sick old man out on the street. And you stood there in perfect silence and watched me walk away." I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the boardroom wrap around his weeping face. "Today I throw you both in jail." I turned my chair away from him. I looked back at the federal agents and gave them a final nod. They grabbed Julian and Vanessa by the arms and dragged them backward out of the boardroom. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off their pathetic cries and leaving my empire completely clean, completely silent, and entirely mine. 1 month is a very strange measure of time. When you are building an empire from the dirt, up a month feels like a fleeting second. But when you are falling from the absolute top of the world down to the brutal concrete bottom, a single month feels like an agonizing, endless eternity. The federal justice system moves with a slow but terrifying momentum. Exactly 30 days after the boardroom doors closed on my ungrateful son and his scheming wife, the dust had finally settled. The sensational news articles about the Holloway Logistics corporate scandal had slowly faded from the front pages, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard reality of consequence. The avalanche started with Wyatt. The arrogant man who thought he could use a black family as a disposable shield to steal government funds was the very first to fall. Wyatt stood in a federal courtroom completely stripped of his bespoke tailored suits. He was wearing a bright orange jumpsuit and his wrists were chained to his waist. The judge did not care about his country club memberships or his supposed old money pedigree. The federal prosecutors presented the undeniable wiretap evidence and the fraudulent minority contracts. Wyatt was handed a 15-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. His company was permanently dissolved, and his precious high society reputation was buried deep in the dirt forever. Julian and Vanessa were completely destroyed by the fallout because Julian had signed that document taking sole responsibility, and because Vanessa was caught on high-definition video bribing a corrupt doctor. They were facing their own massive criminal trials. My lawyer Donovan managed to convince the judge to grant them bail, but the conditions were absolutely brutal. Their passports were confiscated so they could not flee the country. Every single bank account, offshore fund, and hidden asset was seized by the Department of Justice under the Racketeering Act. They were evicted from the 6-bedroom estate I had bought for them. With zero credit, no cash, and their faces plastered across the local news as corporate fraudsters, no respectable landlord in the city would even return their phone calls. They were forced to move into the Starlight Motor Inn. It was a decaying, roach-infested motel sitting right on the edge of the industrial highway. The neon sign outside was constantly buzzing and half-broken. The cramped room smelled like cheap bleach, stale cigarette smoke, and absolute despair. They had gone from sleeping on imported Egyptian cotton sheets to lying on a lumpy, stained mattress in a room where police sirens wailed all night long. For a woman like Vanessa, who believed she was genetically entitled to luxury, the Starlight Motor Inn was a literal hell on earth. My private investigator kept a very close eye on them during their miserable exile. He reported that the screaming matches between Julian and Vanessa could be heard by everyone in the motel parking lot. She blamed Julian for being too stupid to hide the money properly. She blamed him for trusting his father. She tore into him with the exact same racist, toxic venom she had used in those encrypted text messages. Julian, completely broken and facing a decade in federal prison, just sat on the edge of the cheap bed and took the verbal abuse. He had sacrificed his soul to make her happy, and she rewarded him by constantly reminding him that he was nothing but a failed investment. Exactly 3 weeks into their motel nightmare, Vanessa made her final predictable move. Parasites do not stay attached to a dead host. They detach and frantically look for a new source of blood. Julian had managed to secure a tiny, pathetic sum of $500 by selling his last remaining designer watch to a shady pawn shop downtown. It was supposed to be their grocery money for the rest of the month while they waited for their court dates. But when Julian woke up the next morning, the cash was entirely gone. And so was Vanessa. She had packed her 2 remaining designer suitcases in the middle of the night. She took his last $500, walked out the door, and climbed into the passenger seat of a leased sports car driven by some mid-level regional manager she had been secretly messaging online. She abandoned her husband to face the crushing weight of a federal indictment entirely alone. She ran away without a single look back, leaving him with absolutely nothing but the clothes on his back. Left with zero financial support, Julian had to find a way to survive while waiting for his criminal trial. No corporate office would hire a man indicted for massive federal fraud. No logistics company would touch him. The boy who was groomed to inherit a multi-million-dollar empire was forced to face the brutal, unforgiving reality of the blue-collar world he used to openly mock. Yesterday afternoon, I had to travel across the city to sign some final municipal permits for a new shipping warehouse. I was sitting in the back of my armored black town car. My driver was navigating through the heavy industrial district, taking a route that passed by a large rundown commercial gas station. It was a massive fueling station where the 18-wheeler trucks of Holloway Logistics frequently stopped to refuel and grab coffee. I told my driver to pull over and park near the edge of the lot. I did not want to buy anything. I just wanted to observe the world moving around me. Through the heavily tinted bulletproof glass of my vehicle, I saw a man walking out of the public restroom holding a dirty mop and a heavy plastic bucket. He was wearing a faded, oversized blue janitorial uniform. His shoulders were slumped forward, completely devoid of the arrogant, chest-puffed posture he used to carry around my boardroom. He looked exhausted, aged, and utterly defeated. His hands were covered in grease, and his face was dripping with sweat. It was Julian. I watched my son, the former acting chief executive officer, dip a cheap sponge into a bucket of gray, dirty water. I watched him drop to his knees on the rough concrete pavement to scrub a massive oil stain near the diesel pumps. He was doing the exact same kind of back-breaking, filthy labor that I had done 40 years ago to ensure he would never have to touch a mop in his life. The sheer irony of his punishment was staggering. He was working at a gas station where the drivers of my own company trucks threw him spare change for cleaning their windshields. He was literally cleaning up the dirt left behind by the very empire he had tried to steal. I sat in the quiet, climate-controlled comfort of my car. I watched the boy I had raised scraping dirt off the concrete. I thought about the day he shoved me to the marble floor of the bank lobby and told the security guards to throw me out. I thought about the way he laughed when his wealthy white friends called him a useful monkey. I did not feel a sudden surge of vindictive joy. I did not smile at his misery. But I also did not feel a single drop of pity. I did not shed a tear for the broken man scrubbing the pavement. The universe has a very strict accounting system, and the ledger had finally been balanced. He made his choices, and now he was simply paying the bill with the only currency he had left to offer: sweat and humiliation. I tapped the dark glass separating the passenger cabin from the front seat. I quietly told my driver to put the car in gear and take me home. The heavy engine hummed to life, and the town car smoothly pulled out of the parking lot, merging back into the busy city traffic. I did not look back out the window as we drove away. I left Julian on his knees in the dirt, completely erased from my world forever. The grand estate in the gated community was finally completely quiet. For years, the walls of my home had been filled with the suffocating noise of ungrateful people. I walked through the heavy front oak doors and breathed in the crisp morning air. There were no fake high society charity planning committees happening in my living room. There were no arrogant whispers in the hallways. The expensive lavender diffusers that Vanessa loved so much had been thrown into the trash, and the natural scent of polished wood and old leather had finally returned to the rooms. The vultures had been permanently banished from my sanctuary. I walked through the grand foyer and felt a profound sense of absolute peace. It is the kind of peace you only feel when you have successfully defended your soul against those who tried to consume it. The marble floors reflected the warm sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time since my beautiful wife Gloria passed away, this massive house actually felt like a real home. The next morning, I invited my lawyer Donovan back to my private study. We had one final piece of business to conclude. The empire was secure and the parasites were gone, but I needed to ensure the future of the Holloway legacy remained completely untainted. A man who builds a fortress must carefully choose who gets the keys when his time on Earth is finally done. I told Donovan to completely shred the old documents and draft a brand new, irrevocable trust. I was leaving the entirety of my commercial real estate holdings, my personal wealth, and the controlling shares of Holloway Logistics to the only person in my bloodline who had actually retained her humanity and her dignity. My 25-year-old grandniece, Keisha. Keisha had stood by me when I needed someone on the inside. She had planted the digital wiretaps and exposed the horrific racist truth of Vanessa and her brother Wyatt. She had chosen the hard truth over the comfortable illusion of family loyalty. Keisha proved that she possessed the exact same unwavering strength and relentless intelligence that runs deep in our true bloodline. She did not care about designer clothes or country club memberships. She cared about what was right, and she cared about protecting the legacy of her ancestors. I instructed Donovan to attach a strict financial quarantine clause to her inheritance. If Julian or Vanessa ever try to reach out to her for a single dime, they will be met with a concrete wall of federal legal protection. Keisha will take over the logistics empire when I retire. She will run the fleet of 500 trucks with the respect and the fierce dedication that the position demands. But securing the future of my company was only half of my final plan. I am a black man who built a massive corporation from a single rusted garbage truck. I fought for 40 years against a system that was explicitly designed to keep men like me at the very bottom of the economic ladder. The minority-owned business enterprise certification was a badge of honor for me. It was proof that we could overcome systemic barriers and claim our rightful seat at the table. Julian and Wyatt had taken that sacred certification and turned it into a cheap, fraudulent loophole to steal federal taxpayer dollars. They had stained the name of my company with their absolute greed. I needed to wash that stain away permanently. I told Donovan to liquidate $20 million from my private reserve accounts. I did not want to hoard my wealth. I wanted to use it to completely cut off the roots of their deceit and plant something beautiful in its place. We established the Gloria Holloway Foundation for Black Entrepreneurs. I named it after my late wife because she was the woman who gave me the courage to start my first business when we had absolutely nothing but dirt in our pockets. The foundation is designed to provide massive, unencumbered financial grants to young, hardworking black men and women who are trying to build their own legitimate businesses. I want to find the young men who are waking up at 3 in the morning smelling like diesel fuel and sweat, just like I did 40 years ago. I want to give them the capital, the mentorship, and the legal protection they need to thrive in a ruthless corporate world. By funding real, authentic minority businesses, I was ensuring that the fraud Julian committed would be completely erased by a tidal wave of genuine black excellence. We were going to build 100 new empires to replace the one he tried to destroy. With the legal battles completely finished, the trust secured, and the new foundation officially launched, I found myself with no more wars left to fight. The heavy burden of corporate betrayal had been entirely lifted from my shoulders. Late in the evening, I walked into my private study. The room was bathed in the soft golden light of the setting sun. I walked over to the antique globe bar cart that Gloria had bought for me decades ago. I picked up a heavy crystal decanter and poured myself a neat glass of 20-year-old Kentucky bourbon. The sound of the amber liquid splashing against the glass was the only noise in the quiet, peaceful house. I took the glass and walked out through the French doors onto the massive stone patio. The manicured garden stretched out before me, filled with blooming flowers and old oak trees. The air was warm and still. I took a slow sip of the bourbon, letting the familiar burn settle deep in my chest. I thought about the incredible journey of my life. I thought about the rusted trucks, the endless nights of labor, and the staggering heights of success. I thought about Julian scrubbing the filthy pavement at the gas station entirely erased from my world. I did not feel sorrow. I felt the quiet, absolute satisfaction of a life well lived and a legacy successfully protected. I took another sip of my bourbon, looking out at the horizon, knowing that the storm was permanently over. Loyalty is not inherited, it is earned, and betrayal is a debt that always comes due. I spent decades building an empire to shield my son from the harsh realities of the world, only to watch him sell his soul and his heritage for a seat at a table where he was nothing but a disposable pawn. They mistook my silence for weakness and my age for obsolescence. But true power does not roar. It observes, it plans, and it strikes with absolute precision. Never compromise your dignity for those who view your existence as a transaction. When the wolves come for your legacy, do not bleed for them, let them starve. If this story resonated with you and you believe in protecting your peace and demanding the respect you deserve, please let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about uncovering the truth, standing your ground, and walking away from those who do not value your worth. Thank you for listening.